Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Matthew Winkler. Matthew Winkler was born in November 1974 and was the youngest child in his family. He had a brother named Daniel. The family lived in Huntington, Nancy, USA, a small town with fewer than 5,000 people, known for its long history of serving the church. Matthew's grandfather played a significant role in the community as a third-generation Christian minister and was the principal of a school for preachers in the town. Additionally, he authored several books on biblical theology. Matthew's father was also a pastor, and the Winkler family was highly respected in society due to their religious commitment. Father Dan started his career 5 years after Matthew was born. While in high school, he began building a small church, which was completed during his college years. After finishing university, he became a pastor and met his future wife, Diana. They married in 1970 and later had sons. Due to Dan's preaching duties, the family often moved, even to different states, which helped shape their character. Eventually, the Matthew family settled in Austin, Texas. Matthew began attending high school regularly and was an athletic teenager who loved football and worked out almost daily. He was active, energetic, and creative, participating in church puppet shows. Matthew was a kind and popular classmate. After graduating, his parents invited him to serve in the church, marking his first steps toward becoming a pastor. Matthew enrolled at Freed Harmon College in Nancy. Matthew's family was generally happy, with Dan imposing strict rules at home that seemed appropriate for raising two sons. In 1993, the family moved again to a large city in New York State, where Dan worked as a missionary for 11 years. A few months later, Matthew met Mary, a modest but charming student at the university. Mary was a year older than Matthew. Their relationship developed quickly and they began dating. Just 3 months later, Mary announced to her parents that she was introducing them to her boyfriend. The meeting went well. Matthew impressed her devout family, and they approved of the relationship. 6 months later, Matthew proposed to Mary, and she accepted. They were married on April 20, 1994. Mary Freemans was born in 1973 as the eldest child in her family, who were living in the United States at the time. The Mary were devoutly religious and regularly attended the Church of Christ, where Mary's father was the pastor. The family later welcomed the second daughter, Patricia, who faced significant health challenges, including cerebral palsy, spinal meningitis, and developmental disabilities. Despite these challenges, her parents were dedicated to supporting her, teaching her to read, although she struggled with comprehension. Despite their difficulties, Mary and Patricia shared a very close bond. Mary, who was calm, reserved, obedient, and somewhat meek, often slept with Patricia to comfort her. While Mary was in elementary school, her parents decided to adopt a little girl named Shauna. Shauna came from a large family with 4 other siblings who were also placed with different adoptive families. Eventually, all the siblings, including Shauna, were returned to their biological parents. Mary experienced her first major trauma on April 15, 1987, when her younger sister died from a heart attack while taking a bath at the age of 11. This devastating loss affected Mary deeply, and at 13, she sought help from a school psychologist to process her grief. Unfortunately, when her father found out about this, he became angry and demanded that the psychologist stop interfering, believing that he and his wife should resolve the situation themselves. As a result, Mary lacked emotional support from her parents, which led to her developing post-traumatic stress disorder and many other psychological issues that she struggled with throughout her life. Mary's family then adopted 11-year-old Shannon and her 4 siblings, making their dream of having a large family come true. Mary, being the eldest child, took on a supportive role, helping her mother and guiding her younger siblings. Mary then met Matthew, and they began a romance. They began dating and often skipped school to spend time together. When they found out Mary was pregnant, they decided to drop out of school. They married and moved to Knoxville, where they lived in a small apartment near Mary's parents. Matthew found work on a construction site. During this time, he felt exhausted by the physical demands of his job and the challenges of their marriage that they were beginning to experience. Matthew began to take his stress out on his wife. He felt resentment towards Mary for dropping out of school and for the difficult situation they were in, especially while his friends were living carefree lives. In order to support his family, Matthew had to work hard. Eventually, he decided to quit his job and start looking for a new job back home. During this time, Mary faced new challenges when her mother was diagnosed with cancer. Despite the support of her family and her mother's treatment at a specialist clinic, sadly her mother passed away in April 1999. The loss had a profound impact on the entire family. Mary's father was left to care for 5 children on his own, leaving her adopted siblings to seek Mary's help more often. Although she supported them as much as she could, she was unable to spend all her time with them as she was pregnant with her second child and responsible for her new baby. In June 1999, the Matthew family began searching for a home. With limited financial resources, they purchased a small, modest house that was still under construction in the small town of Pegram, which had a population of only 2,000. This town was located 15 kilometers from the church where Matthew had secured a job as a pastor. The family moved into their new house in preparation for the birth of their second daughter. Mary began to experience postpartum depression and faced many challenges during this time. Along with caring for her children, she also took on the responsibility of caring for her foster siblings, who were often demanding and difficult. This behavior frustrated both Mary and her husband, Matthew. Eventually, she began to withdraw from her relatives, possibly due to the constant pressure from her husband and foster siblings. A family friend described Mary as modest, shy, homely, and somewhat peculiar. She struggled with social interactions, had a limited circle of friends, and tended to be reserved. At the same time, she experienced unpredictable mood swings, which sometimes upset her husband. Mary began to complain about sexual violence from her husband. However, he did not consider his actions to be the problem. Instead, he believed that it was Mary's rigidity that caused the problem. After a particularly tense argument, Mary invited her 2 brothers to stay overnight because she felt unsafe being alone with her husband. During that time, Matthew realized that they needed to stay away from her family to reduce their influence on his family life. After they moved away, Matthew's marriage began to improve. Mary described the transition as challenging but felt relieved that they had worked through their issues together. The couple bought a house in the small town of Markmenville. At this time, Mary was pregnant again and was excited at the prospect of having a large family, like hers. Unfortunately, Mary later suffered a miscarriage. In the new town, Mary's family met nice neighbors. Matthew's pastoral career is booming, but it requires him to travel frequently, which means he is often away from home. Matthew is looking forward to being promoted to pastor of the local church. Meanwhile, Mary takes a part-time job to help support the family financially. Matthew also worked part-time teaching Bible lessons at Boyd Christian School. He was highly regarded as a specialist and was seen as a positive influence who instilled religious values in his parishioners. He earned the respect of the entire community. However, those who worked closely with Matthew noticed a different side. He was often arrogant and caused tension whenever he was in the office. Mary brought him lunch every day, and although she was very attentive, Matthew treated her with disdain. This angered his secretary. Because of what she considered unacceptable behavior for a man of his faith. No one suspected that Matthew was behaving badly at home. Behind closed doors, he abused his wife. This continued until one day Mary showed up with a black eye, causing concern in the local community. She claimed it was an accident but would not explain how she got the bruise. Rumors began to spread that Matthew might be harming her, including sexually, and his addiction became a topic of conversation in the community. It's unclear if this contributed to Matthew's professional downfall, but in 2004, he lost his job as a church pastor. A more reputable preacher was hired to take his place, which drove Matthew into a frenzy as he had to search for work again. The Matthew family relocated to another city to start anew. There, Matthew finds work at a local church, and Mary is pregnant with another baby girl. However, the transition was not without its challenges. Soon after moving in, conflicts arose with the neighbors due to a dog that lived nearby. Mary was worried that the dog might bite her children and even threatened to shoot it, which led to resistance from the neighbors. Meanwhile, at his new job at the church, Matthew's behavior changed dramatically. There, he was seen as a polite, caring, loving husband, admired as the head of a wonderful family. For a time, he struggled to maintain this positive image. Brett Glenn, a family friend with close ties to Matthew's family, supported him. While Matthew's family was attending the wedding anniversary of his best friend Brett, Matthew saw that Brett's family had bought a pistol for self-defense. Matthew thought that their family should also have a pistol at home. Matthew then took Mary to the shooting range to learn. However, soon after, strange events began to occur in Matthew's family. At that time, after giving birth, Mary enrolled in a teacher training program at the university. She wanted to get an education and find a job caring for sick children. On December 1, 2005, Mary received a check that appeared to be a lottery prize. She needed money to pay her insurance premiums, so she took out a loan while she waited for the lottery payout and also took out a similar loan from the bank. Unfortunately, it turned out to be a scam, leaving her in a difficult situation. She opened an account to deposit a large sum of money, but the check was fake. Mary attempted to commit financial fraud in the hopes of obtaining $6,500, but her scheme was too naive to succeed and was eventually discovered. In February 2006, she realized that her financial transaction had been declined. She then contacted the bank and changed the postal address of her account to a rented post office box, indicating her intention to commit fraud. She then opened a new bank account using only her cell phone number and postal address as her contact information. This account had a balance of $100, which she used to go to the bank and attempt to withdraw $7,000 to pay off her previous debt. She then redirected all of her mail to the rented post office box. Meanwhile, Matthew received congratulations from his father for their improving financial situation, completely unaware of the chaos his wife was causing. They had nearly paid off their debts thanks to compensation from an accident a few months earlier. Ironically, while Matthew focused on enhancing their financial well-being, Mary was engaged in fraudulent activities, making their situation even worse. The following day, the bank administration reached out to Mary to inform her that her transaction was illegal and that there were insufficient funds to fulfill her requested amounts. They insisted that she come to the branch with her husband to speak with the manager and resolve the issue. However, instead of discussing it with her husband, Mary chose to remain silent. A bank employee suggested that she take out a $5,000 loan to cover the shortfall, which would allow her to move on from the situation. Yet, since the account was joint with her husband, Mary could not make this decision without his approval, so she left without a solution. Later, bank employees contacted Mary again, warning her that she needed to address the issue urgently, or she could face criminal charges for fraud. They reiterated the loan offer, which would enable her to settle the debt related to counterfeit checks. Mary said she would consider it. While she was contemplating her options, a tragic event occurred on March 22, 2006. The Matthew were expected to attend the church service with the parishioners, and their 3 daughters were also supposed to join the other children. However, when the time came, the entire family was absent. This raised suspicions since the pastor's family was known for never missing significant events. After a brief wait, the elder called their home, but there was no answer, which was unusual for church ministers. Additionally, Matthew was scheduled to deliver an important sermon that day, leading everyone present to suspect that something was amiss. A church minister visited Matthew and Mary's home to check on them. The lights were on, and the TV was blaring, but nobody responded to his calls or knocks at the door. The minister tried looking through the windows but couldn't see inside. He then sought help from neighbors and fellow church members. After an extensive search, they found spare keys in a shed on the property. At around 9 p.m., they finally opened the door to the house. When they entered, the pastors witnessed a horrifying scene. In the couple's bedroom, they discovered Matthew's body on the floor, surrounded by a pool of blood. The church pastors then called 911, prompting police and ambulances to arrive at the scene. Doctors confirmed Matthew was dead. Forensic experts began working to find evidence, but because the crime scene had many traces left by witnesses, it was difficult for them to collect evidence. Meanwhile, Mary and the children were missing from the house, and the family car was gone. Police suspected that the rest of the family may have been kidnapped and were in danger. At the time, no one could have imagined what had actually happened in the house. The autopsy report showed that Matthew had suffered a fatal gunshot wound to the chest and had bled to death. The police's investigation uncovered Mary's involvement in financial fraud, which tarnished her reputation. She was now seen as both a victim and a criminal due to her use of counterfeit checks. As a result, she, her children, and her car were placed on a wanted list. Police attempted to track her mobile phone and discovered that she was in Orange Beach, Alabama, approximately 600 kilometers from where the crime occurred. Police in that area were alerted and worked to apprehend her. On March 23, a police officer spotted a minivan making an illegal U-turn around 7:30 p.m. 3 police cars surrounded Mary's vehicle in a grocery store parking lot. The police acted carefully, fearing that she and her children might have been kidnapped and could be in danger. However, Mary was driving the minivan herself, and she was quickly arrested. She listened to her rights with a blank expression and went to the police station with her children. In the back seat of her car, they discovered a 12-gauge shotgun, and Matthew was shot with. Mary's daughters extremely frightened. Mary gave her relatives contact information so the children could be cared for while she was arrested. She faced criminal charges of check fraud and explained the circumstances surrounding her husband Matthew's death on the bedroom floor. Just a day after her arrest, Mary confessed that the previous day, she and her husband had had a minor argument, which led to them sleeping in separate rooms. She eventually retrieved a gun he had kept in the closet for protection. Mary said she could not remember the events clearly, feeling like she had amnesia. She recalled hearing a noise and then seeing her husband fall out of bed, gasping for air and covered in blood. Her account was a blur to her. She could not remember how she got the gun and shot him, nor could she explain her actions. 5 months after her arrest, Mary's father mortgaged their home to pay the $750,000 bail to get her out. After her release, Mary moved to Tennessee and worked at a dry cleaner while awaiting trial. Prosecutors argued that Mary had carefully planned the murder. She disabled Matthew's cell phone to prevent him from calling for help, leading to his death from blood loss. Mary knew where guns were kept in their home and had easy access to them. A handgun was identified as the murder weapon, but the motive for the crime remains a mystery. Mary, who used to be so quiet and gentle, and why she killed her husband, while the locals considered Matthew a holy man. The children stated that Matthew was a good father who never harmed them or their mother. They had never witnessed any arguments between their parents. One day, they were awakened by a loud noise and went to investigate. As they turned the corner in the hallway, they saw their father lying on the floor. However, their mother quickly closed the door in front of them, leaving the girls confused about what had happened. The prosecution alleged that Mary was experiencing financial difficulties that she tried to hide from her husband. This was difficult to maintain, as he would eventually discover her deception when he checked her bills. It is believed that after uncovering her fraud, Matthew was shot, or that she planned to kill him to prevent him from learning about her schemes. During the investigation, it was revealed that the check fraud was not Mary's only illegal activity. She had submitted a fake document to 5 banks, committing scams totaling $17,500. This type of fraud, known as check kiting, involves artificially inflating the balance on a bank account to access non-existent funds. Bank staff confirmed that they repeatedly asked Mary and her husband to meet with managers to resolve the issue of missing money. None of the banks reported her to the police, and they tried to resolve the situation amicably. However, Mary chose to ignore their requests because she wanted to hide her financial troubles from her husband. During the trial, Mary denied confessing to murdering her husband, claiming that she was in a state of shock. Her attorneys argued that her husband was a domestic abuser who not only assaulted her, but also raped her and coerced her into committing these acts of fraud. A key point of the defense concerned the murder weapon. They argued that loading the shotgun would have made a lot of noise, which would have woken her husband, suggesting that it had been loaded long before the crime occurred. Mary, unaware of the gun being ready, simply grabbed it to threaten her husband. Unfortunately, the gun accidentally discharged, resulting in her husband's death. Therefore, the defense asserted that the shooting was an accident. The scenario raises the question of why a loving wife would point a gun at her sleeping husband, even if her intention was to intimidate him, not shoot him. In court, Mary recounted the horrific experiences she endured living with a husband she described as a domestic tyrant. She accused him of sexual, emotional, and physical abuse. To illustrate her point, Mary produced a wig and high-heeled shoes that her husband forced her to wear, even wearing the shoes to court. She burst into tears upon seeing them again. Matthew's controlling behavior extended to how she dressed, as he forced her to wear revealing outfits and watch adult films. He pushed her toward intimate relationships that were unusual for her, even requiring her to get his approval to get a haircut. Despite this, she hid her shame and fear, concealing the truth about him. She described a home environment where he maintained strict control and harshly punished Mary for the smallest mistakes. She even feared he might be abusing their children. Over the years, this led her to build up significant resentment towards him. On the morning of the incident, Mary was awakened by her youngest daughter's crying at 6 o'clock. Frustrated, Matthew angrily pulled her out of bed, insisting that Mary go comfort their daughter. Mary complied and went to the nursery, but the youngest daughter continued to cry, which made Matthew even angrier. He ran into the room, picked up the baby, and covered her mouth and nose to silence her. Fearing for her daughter's safety, Mary begged her husband to give her the child. Finally, he returned his daughter to her and returned to the bedroom. Mary calmed her daughter, put her to bed, and then took a shotgun to confront her husband, accidentally shooting him in the process. Initially, Mary was confused and didn't comprehend what had just occurred. She saw her husband fall from the bed and hit his head. Fearing he had fallen and would be angry with her, she quickly left the bedroom. Listening for any signs that he might be pursuing her, Mary confirmed it was quiet and went back to the bedroom. It was then that she fully understood that she had shot Matthew. In a panic, she took the children and ran away from home. Mary explained that she lost control and shot her husband in a fit of rage due to his violent behavior toward the children and her. After he attacked them, he went to sleep, and in that moment of anguish, she accidentally shot him. However, the prosecutor disagreed with her testimony, finding it implausible and inconsistent with her initial interrogation. They argued that she killed Matthew to prevent him from discovering her financial fraud. The jury had to consider numerous documents and testimony, and consider several sentencing options for Mary Freemans. The lightest sentence was 1 year in prison, while the most severe was life in prison without parole. She also faced the possibility of losing her parental rights forever. After deliberating for about 8 hours, the jury returned a verdict on April 19, 2007, finding Mary guilty of manslaughter, which fell between the lightest and most severe sentences. The case was awaiting a final verdict from the judge, and Mary was expected to be sentenced to at least 6 years in prison. However, the judge's ruling came as a surprise. Mary Freemans was sentenced to just 210 days in prison, with the 5 months she had already served before the trial counting toward that sentence. After the sentencing, Mary was committed to a mental hospital for 60 days before being released. The judge and jury justified their lenient sentence by stating that they believed Mary and considered her a victim of domestic violence who had been pushed to her limits. Many local residents shared this belief, especially influenced by Mary's account of wearing stripper shoes, which the women of the small town found humiliating and expressed their support for her. The prosecution found the sentence unfair. They believed it was a premeditated murder because Mary deliberately picked up a gun and entered the bedroom without being pursued or in any danger. Once in the bedroom, she pointed the gun at her husband and shot him, showing that it was not an accidental murder. Despite their arguments, the court rejected their arguments and denied several appeals to reconsider the case. The decision was widely seen as unjust, leading to public outrage, particularly among the victims' relatives. In August 2008, Mary won full custody of her 3 daughters, who had been living with Matthew's parents. A custody battle ensued, with Matthew's relatives arguing that Mary was an unfit mother because she had killed her husband and had anger management issues. They expressed concern that she might resort to violence again. However, their arguments were unsuccessful and Mary was awarded custody of the children. She was not charged with any wrongdoing in connection with Matthew's death, and it was implied that she had been coerced into committing the crime. Mary worked at a dry cleaner's for a time before moving to a daycare near McMinnville. Unfortunately, neither of these jobs were long-term due to the negative attention she received from the public and media. Mary is now 50 years old, she lives a lonely life and no one knows where she is. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Milleke van Doorn. Milleke grew up in a typical family with her parents and 2 sisters in Zaanstad, a city in North Holland, Netherlands. Milleke was a well-behaved child who stayed out of trouble and was friendly to everyone. Having just graduated from high school with a good reputation, she was looking forward to a bright future. However, her life took a dramatic turn one summer evening. That summer night changed everything for Milleke, and her story became a national sensation. On the evening of Sunday, June 7, 1992, Milleke attended a birthday party for a friend, which was held in an apartment in a local building. The building looked almost the same back then as it does today, except for the taller trees that surround it. Milleke left her birthday celebration early to catch the last bus home, but when she arrived at the bus stop, she realized she had missed it by 30 minutes. Unbeknownst to her, the bus schedule had been adjusted due to the Pentecost holiday. She had another option to get home than taking the train from the station located half a mile away on the same street. However, she never come home. The next morning, the pastor of St. Joseph's Church, which is near the train station, made a disturbing discovery while on his morning walk. He found a body floating in a pond adjacent to the church and immediately called the police at 8:54 a.m. Within minutes, detectives arrived at the scene, and the tragic news was soon delivered to the Van Doorn family, leaving them in a state of shock and grief. Milleke's body was pulled from the water, bearing signs of a violent crime. Injuries on her neck, face, and body, including multiple stab wounds, were evident. She was also found partially undressed. In an attempt to conceal the crime, the perpetrator had covered the body with reeds, but this effort failed, leading to its discovery. The news of Milika's tragic death was devastating for her family, who had envisioned a bright future for her. The autopsy provided some information about the crime. The presence of semen and pubic hair in Milika's body suggested a sexual assault. The fact that there was no water in Milika's lungs indicated that she did not drown in the pond. Instead, she had likely been killed elsewhere, and her body was later hidden in the water in an attempt to disguise the crime. The exact time of Milika's death remained unclear, with possibilities ranging from immediately after she left a party to several hours later. Milika's body was found in the water, which made it impossible to determine the time of death by body temperature alone. The pond was where her body was dumped, but it was not the location where she was actually killed. The police were searching for the original crime scene, where they expected to find evidence due to the severity of Milika's injuries. A key piece of evidence was that one of her shoes was missing, which could potentially lead investigators to both the crime scene and the perpetrator. The police distributed flyers with information about the case, including the fact that one of Milika's shoes was missing. They asked the public to report if the shoe was found, and eventually, the second shoe was discovered. At the time of the investigation in 1992, DNA research was not advanced, and DNA samples taken from Milika's body did not provide any useful leads for the detectives. The investigation began with interviews with Milika's family to determine if she had any conflicts or enemies. However, the family reported that Milika had no conflicts with anyone and was doing well personally. She had a boyfriend around her age, and they rarely fought. After learning that Milika attended a birthday party on the night she died, investigators spoke to all the guests, including her boyfriend. However, numerous interviews did not produce any leads, and everyone reported the same story that Milika had left the party just before midnight and planned to take a bus to her neighborhood. Unfortunately, none of Milika's friends were aware that the last bus had already departed by the time she reached the bus stop. In 1992, mobile phones were not widespread, making it difficult for investigators to determine if Milika had boarded the bus or reached her destination safely. After ruling out her friends as suspects, the police began searching for witnesses who may have seen or heard something on the night of the crime. They conducted door-to-door interviews with residents in the area where Milika's body was found, gathering a significant amount of information, but few specific details. Several witnesses reported hearing a woman scream briefly at night, but it was not alarming enough to prompt them to take action. Others claimed to have seen a man of Turkish appearance riding a bicycle towards the location where Milika's body was discovered. As a result, investigators shifted their focus to the Turkish community living in the Kogerveld neighborhood. Some young men from the Turkish community had previous run-ins with the law, drawing the attention of investigators. However, despite months of inquiry, the police were unable to identify a suspect. The men they questioned denied being near the pond on the night of the crime, leading to a stalemate in the investigation. 6 months after Milika van Doorn's murder, a significant discovery was made when a roofer working on the roof of St. Joseph's Church found one of Milika's shoes. This shoe had been on the roof the entire time, but it was unclear how it got there since the only way to access the roof was by ladder. The conclusion was that the perpetrator must have deliberately thrown the shoe onto the roof while at the pond, but the reasoning behind this action remains a mystery. Unfortunately, any potential evidence that may have been left on the roof was erased by harsh weather conditions over time. Years went by, and Milika's case remained unsolved, causing immense pain for her parents. Despite the passing of time, the police revisited Milika's case, conducting multiple interviews with local residents in an attempt to uncover new information. Additionally, the case was featured on several television programs, which led to an influx of calls from the public with potential leads. However, none of these efforts resulted in a breakthrough, and the identity of the suspect remains unknown. The authorities had the perpetrator's DNA samples on file, waiting for a breakthrough in testing technology. By analyzing these samples, forensic experts inferred that the perpetrator was likely a male of Turkish origin, residing in the Kogerveld area in 1992, and aged between 16 and 30 years at the time of the crime. To narrow down the search, nearly 200 men from the area voluntarily provided cheek swabs for DNA testing, but unfortunately, this effort did not yield a match. Almost 20 years after Milika's murder, a significant breakthrough occurred in April 2012. The Netherlands amended a law making it possible to conduct DNA kinship testing. By analyzing the autopsy results, evidence, and the perpetrator's behavior, investigators created a psychological profile of the suspect. The profile suggested that the perpetrator was a resentful and frustrated individual, angry at women in general. Milika was likely an accidental victim who happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. The perpetrator may have had a brief conversation with Milika before attacking her violently and threatening her. After satisfying his urges, he killed her to prevent her from identifying him. For several weeks after the crime, he kept a low profile, possibly pretending to be ill to avoid social interactions and conceal the scratches he sustained during the struggle with Milika. The police profiler described the suspect as a hot-tempered, selfish, and critical individual with few friends, poor relationships with girlfriends, and an inability to handle criticism. Based on this profile, investigators estimated that the perpetrator was between 18 and 25 years old in 1992. In April 2016, investigators reopened the case of Milika van Doorn, which had gone cold for over 20 years. A new lead emerged in June 2016, when a report was filed mentioning the names of two Turkish men who had lived in Zandvoort in 1992, around the time of Milika's death. Notably, both men had left the area shortly after the incident. The police aimed to determine if these two individuals were connected to the crime. Tracking them down proved challenging, and it took over a year to locate them in Turkey and obtain the necessary DNA samples. Finally, the DNA analysis did not yield a match with the DNA evidence found on Milika's body. In 2017, authorities used DNA typing technology to re-examine the Milika case. As a result, the police contacted 133 men of Turkish origin who lived in the area where the body was found in 1992, asking for voluntary DNA samples to compare to the crime scene DNA. The goal was to analyze the Y chromosome pattern, which is passed from father to son, to identify potential relatives of the perpetrator. The authorities assured the men that their DNA would only be used for this case and would be destroyed afterward. Most of the 133 men agreed to provide a DNA sample, only a few refused. A total of 126 men participated in the study. The police appreciated their cooperation, saying it was a testament to the community's desire for justice. After a month of analysis, the results showed that the DNA of the original perpetrator was not among the samples. However, the DNA of a man who was unknowingly related to the perpetrator was found. On Monday, December 10, 2017, the police arrested the suspect who had evaded capture for 25 years. The man, 47-year-old Hussein, had refused to submit his DNA for verification, but a clever investigation led to his downfall. Since local laws prohibit sharing suspects' personal information, his full identity and photo were not made public. A breakthrough in the case came when investigators cross-checked DNA profiles of relatives, focusing on those who, like Hussein, had refused to provide a sample. Coincidentally, Hussein's brother had willingly provided his DNA to the authorities, unaware of its potential impact on his sibling. This helped the investigators build a list of people connected to Hussein through family ties, ultimately revealing his identity as the suspect who had managed to stay hidden for nearly 2.5 decades. The police obtained a warrant to take a DNA sample from Hussein without his permission. A comparison with the DNA samples from Milika's body showed a perfect match, providing strong evidence against him. As a result, Hussein was formally charged with the crime. During his 2018 trial, Hussein claimed he was not guilty. Initially, he said he was possessed by an evil spirit and couldn't remember the attack. Later, he changed his story, saying he had a secret relationship with Milika, which is why his DNA was found on her body. He claimed he had to keep the relationship a secret because he had recently gotten married. However, the judge didn't believe Hussein's new claim for two reasons. Firstly, he only made this statement a year after his arrest, and secondly, no one could confirm that Milika and Hussein even knew each other, let alone had an intimate relationship. Milika's family testified during the trial. Milika's sister spoke directly to the suspect, saying that he had kept silent for years, hadn't cooperated with the police when they asked for a DNA test, and had continued living freely in the neighborhood. She accused him of going on to start a family and have had 4 daughters and called him a monster who had ruined Milika's life. She expressed her disgust that there were men like him who used and exploited women, treated them like trash, and then simply moved on with their lives. The other sister expressed her disappointment and frustration that Hussein had not taken responsibility for his actions or shown remorse. Instead, he had made a surprising claim of a secret relationship with the victim and complained about his own family struggles. She pointed out that Hussein's family could visit him in prison if they wished, but she could only visit her sister's grave. She hoped for justice, believing that her sister deserved it after meeting a terrible end. It was a deeply emotional day for Milika Van Doorn's family. When her father was given the opportunity to speak, he was filled with anger and said that Hussein's silence for 25 years was cowardly. He found Hussein's treatment of Milika to be extremely disturbing and was shocked by the news of her death. On December 11, 2018, Hussein was found guilty of Milika's murder based on DNA evidence. The court determined that the murder was committed to cover up another crime, a sex crime. Hussein was sentenced to 20 years in prison and ordered to pay €10,000 in compensation to Milika's family. Notably, Hussein refused to be present in the courtroom during the sentencing and instead remained in a cell outside. In February 2019, Hussein appealed his 20-year prison sentence and it was reduced to 19 years and 7 months. But finally, he did not get to serve the full reduced term. Hussein was found dead on June 13, 2022. According to his lawyer, he died shortly after exercising despite receiving emergency medical treatment. The attempts to revive him were unsuccessful. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Jessica Paget. Jessica was born on December 15, 1980, in Pennsylvania, where she spent her entire life. As a child, she was energetic and cheerful. However, her parents, Thomas and Danelle, divorced when she was young. Her mother later remarried, and Jessica formed a close bond with her stepfather, whom she considered her second father. After graduating from high school in 1998, Jessica attended college to study preschool education. It was during this time that she met her future husband, Michael Paget. They began dating, moved in together, and had 2 children over the course of their 8-year relationship. Although they didn't get married until August 2014, Michael was a caring father and husband. However, like any family, they experienced ups and downs in their relationship. Jessica was happy with Michael, but just 4 months after their wedding, she vanished. Before her disappearance, Jessica worked at a kindergarten in Northampton for 2 years. She loved her job, as she was passionate about working with children and had a natural ability to connect with them. The children adored her, and she enjoyed spending time with them. On November 21, 2014, Jessica dropped off her older children at school and then headed to work with her younger son, who attended the same kindergarten. It was a typical day, with no indication of the trouble that was to come. Jessica asked her administrator if she could take a short break from work to send a fax to her mother's house in a rural area near Northampton. The administrator agreed, and Jessica left her son at kindergarten before driving to her mother's house. She was expected to return to work within 30 minutes, but an hour passed and she didn't come back. Her colleagues tried calling her, but she didn't answer. When Jessica failed to return, the kindergarten administrator contacted her husband, Michael, to ask if he knew where she was. Michael said he was at work and hadn't heard from her. He tried calling her, but all his calls went straight to voicemail, which was unusual for Jessica as she always answered calls from her family. Michael then called his mother-in-law, Danelle, who was in Florida, to see if Jessica had contacted her. However, Danelle hadn't heard from her daughter all day and was immediately worried. She suggested that Michael call her husband, Greg, who was Jessica's stepfather, to see if he had any information. However, Greg reported that he hadn't seen or spoken to Jessica that day. As the minutes ticked by, Jessica's relatives grew increasingly worried. After numerous failed attempts to contact her, Danelle took a flight to Pennsylvania to search for her daughter. Meanwhile, for hours after Jessica disappeared from work, her husband Michael reported her missing to the police. He expressed his concern that Jessica would never leave their children voluntarily, leading him to fear the worst. The police promptly launched an investigation, distributing Jessica's description to all nearby stations. She was described as 5 feet 4 inches tall, weighing 130 pounds, with a footprint tattoo on her shoulder, brown hair, and hazel eyes. At the time of her disappearance, she was wearing gray sweatpants and a black hoodie with the words "Duck, Duck, Goose" on the front and "Staff" on the back. A thorough search of local hospitals and morgues yielded no results. Detectives worked to determine Jessica's whereabouts, interviewing her co-workers in the process. However, everyone they spoke to reported that Jessica had no enemies and was well liked by her colleagues, children, and their parents. According to her co-workers, Jessica seemed fine when she left work at lunchtime, and they noticed nothing unusual about her behavior. 2 hours after Michael reported his wife Jessica missing, the police were able to locate her phone signal, which indicated that it was approximately 1 mile from the kindergarten where she worked. Although the data was not entirely accurate due to inherent location determination errors, it provided a general area for the police to focus their search. However, by the time they began searching, it was already nighttime. The police found Jessica's car, a white Subaru Outback, in a nearby parking lot. The vehicle was unlocked and empty, with her purse, documents, and bank card still inside. The keys were in the ignition, and her phone was on the passenger seat next to her purse. There were no signs of a crime in the car, leaving the police with several unanswered questions. Where was Jessica, and what had caused her to abandon her car and valuables so close to her workplace? To answer these questions, the police sought CCTV footage. A camera on the back wall of a store across the street had captured the area where Jessica's car was found. After reviewing the footage with the store manager, the police saw Jessica driving into the parking lot at around 1 p.m. She got out of the car and stood by the driver's door for a short time before leaving and not returning. The investigators were baffled by Jessica's disappearance, as she had left behind her documents, phone, and keys. It was unclear whether she had intentionally gone into hiding. Surveillance footage showed Jessica walking between 2 buildings towards another parking lot, where she vanished from view due to the lack of cameras. To get a better look at the footage, the investigators made a copy of the video to review on a larger screen at the police station. The Northampton Police Department, being a small force, enlisted the help of the Pennsylvania State Police to coordinate a search effort. Flyers with Jessica's photo were distributed throughout Northampton and surrounding cities, as well as shared on social media and through local news outlets. State police detectives began reconstructing the events leading up to Jessica's disappearance. They started by re-interviewing the kindergarten staff, who revealed that Jessica had left work to send a fax from her mother's house. The detectives then visited the house, which was approximately 4 miles from the kindergarten, in search of answers. The detectives met with Danelle and her husband Greg at the scene and learned that Jessica had keys to their home and could visit at any time. On the day of her disappearance, both Danelle and Greg had been out, Danelle in Florida and Greg elsewhere, which left uncertainty about Jessica's activities at the house. They also checked Greg's fax machine for records of usage, but found that the device was faulty, which didn't provide any clear information. Jessica might have used another fax machine, but it still didn't explain why she had left her belongings in her car. The detectives decided to speak with Jessica's husband Michael, as husbands are often suspects in such cases. To confirm Michael's story that he was the first to leave the house on the day Jessica disappeared, detectives investigated his claim. It was a possibility they couldn't rule out, as statistically, a significant number of disappearances involve a partner. As they continued the investigation, the police arranged a search party, and local media alerted the public about Jessica's disappearance. Anyone with information was asked to come forward. By this point, 48 hours had passed, but no new leads emerged on Jessica's journey to her mother's house. To aid in their investigation, detectives scoured the route to her mother's house for surveillance cameras. One key location, an Exxon gas station adjacent to the main road leading to the mother's residence, had multiple cameras installed. Given the fact that this gas station was strategically situated on Jessica's stated route, the police logically inferred that if Jessica drove in the direction she said, she would be captured on camera. A review of the recording showed that her car was, indeed, captured driving by at approximately 12:56 p.m. From there, the journey to her mother's house took just a few minutes, suggesting Jessica would need to make the short trip back in order to utilize a functional fax machine, which wasn't operational at her mother's home. While fast-forwarding the tape to find a shot of the vehicle's potential return, detectives made a perplexing observation. The footage shows Jessica's white car speeding through a gas station just 14 minutes later. Notably, the car took a peculiar route, turning towards the gas station and continuing onto the other side without stopping, before heading towards the city center, where the car was later abandoned in a parking lot. Given her rapid pace, the likely reason for this unusual detour was a red traffic light at the intersection, which Jessica may have attempted to avoid by cutting through the gas station. From there, she drove onto a different road where the light was green and eventually left her car in the parking lot, where a police officer discovered it later. However, a surprising detail emerged upon closer inspection of the footage. Jessica, who was 5 feet 4 inches tall and 130 pounds, appeared to be much shorter and lighter than the person seen exiting her car. Measuring against the known height of the car, experts estimated that this person stood between 5 feet 11 inches and 6 feet 3 inches tall. Moreover, during their examination of the abandoned car, the police noticed that the driver's seat was pushed forward, which would make it uncomfortable for someone taller than 5 feet 11 inches to operate the vehicle comfortably. The police initially found it suspicious that the driver's seat was positioned for someone of Jessica's height. However, after reviewing the footage, they discovered that the person who got out of the car had adjusted the seat to its most forward position, attempting to make it seem like Jessica was driving. But this raised another question: who was the tall person seen in the footage? Michael, he, stood at around 6 feet tall. The police brought him in for questioning, and he denied any involvement in his wife's disappearance, claiming he was at work when the kindergarten staff called him. Detectives verified his alibi by interviewing his colleagues and tracking the geolocation of his phone on the day of Jessica's disappearance. The evidence confirmed that Michael was indeed at work at the time, which meant the person in the footage was not him. For days had passed since Jessica's disappearance, and her children were struggling to cope with the stress and uncertainty. Despite the ongoing search efforts, no leads had been found. Investigators re-examined the footage of someone exiting Jessica's car, but the person's identity remained a mystery. However, upon closer inspection, the officers noticed a detail they had previously missed. A minute after the unknown person disappeared from view, a white SUV, likely a Ford, left the scene. This new information led the police to Greg, Jessica's stepfather, who matched the suspect's height description and owned a similar vehicle. The police requested that Greg come to the station for questioning, leaving him shocked and dismayed to be considered a suspect in his stepdaughter's disappearance. Greg claimed that he had left his car at a service center for repairs and that a neighbor had given him a ride there to pick it up. He then stated that he had stopped at an Exxon gas station to grab a bite to eat. However, the police obtained CCTV footage from the gas station, which showed Greg driving past the station just 2 minutes after leaving the service center. It turned out that Greg had lied about stopping at the gas station. Further investigation revealed that Greg's entire story was fabricated. His neighbor denied driving him to the service center, contradicting Greg's claim. This led detectives to suspect that Greg might have been involved in Jessica's disappearance. By piecing together the evidence, investigators concluded that Greg was likely at home when Jessica arrived. It's possible that something happened, and Greg drove Jessica's car to a parking lot in the city center. The police searched Greg's house, where they found evidence that contradicted his alibi. The fax machine, which Greg claimed was not working, was found to be functional, and its usage history showed that Jessica had indeed sent a fax from the house on the day of her disappearance. Furthermore, a trash can in the basement contained napkins with bloodstains, and Greg's shoes, which were found in a dumpster on the street, had dried blood on them. Donnell reported to the police that Greg had requested an early trash pickup the day before, which seemed unusual at the time, especially since the trash can wasn't full. In hindsight, this could be how Greg disposed of evidence related to cleaning products and rags used in the house. During a second interrogation, the police confronted Greg, stating that they knew his previous statements were false and that they had found evidence in his home. They also informed him that they were aware Jessica had been at his house on the day she disappeared. Greg then began to talk. Greg claimed that when he returned home on the afternoon of November 21st, he found Jessica's car in the driveway and bloodstains on the carpet. He alleged that Jessica was already dead when he arrived and that he panicked, fearing no one would believe him. He supposedly drove Jessica's car to a city center parking lot and then returned home. Greg also stated that Jessica had outstanding debts, which he claimed led to her death. However, detectives later discovered that this was another lie, and they found evidence that Greg had purchased adult toys the day before Jessica disappeared. The investigators were fed up with Greg's inconsistent stories, so they directly asked him where he had hidden his stepdaughter Jessica's body, explaining that an autopsy would provide answers to many questions. Realizing he was caught, Greg changed his story again. This time, he claimed he was at home watching adult videos when Jessica arrived and asked to send a fax. According to Greg, he was standing behind her as she used the computer, and he became aroused and developed a desire for his stepdaughter. Without saying a word, he allegedly pulled out a gun and shot her in the back of the head. Then, he moved Jessica's body to the bedroom. Greg then drove Jessica's car to a parking lot in the city center, where he had previously left his Ford for repairs. To mislead investigators, he adjusted the seat to make it appear as though Jessica was driving. What Greg said next shocked the investigators. After returning home, he set up a video camera near the bed and recorded a video of himself with Jessica's body. The police later found this disturbing video on Greg's computer. Greg confessed to wrapping his stepdaughter Jessica's body in a blanket and hiding it in a ravine near his home. He claimed he was not a bad person, but had lost control. After the crime, Greg's life fell apart, he lost his business, home, dogs, and wife. However, he never mentioned the loss of Jessica. Jessica's mother, Danelle, was shocked to discover that her daughter was dead and that her husband was responsible. The authorities announced Jessica's death, stating that she was a victim of homicide. The district attorney, John Morganelli, expressed skepticism about Greg's version of events, but believed there was a sexual motive behind the crime. The prosecutor's office examined the evidence to determine if Greg had planned the attack. Jessica's family released a statement thanking law enforcement, the media, and the public for their efforts. They described Jessica as a beautiful and vibrant young woman who was loved by her family and friends, and stated that her loss made the world a darker place. Gregory Gregg, 53, was charged with the murder of Jessica Padette. Initially, investigators suspected that Greg had tried to persuade Jessica into a romantic encounter, but when she refused, he killed her to avoid exposure. However, this theory was difficult to prove due to the lack of defensive wounds on Jessica's body. She died from a single wound to the back of her head, which corroborated Greg's testimony. Under Pennsylvania law, Greg could have faced the death penalty, but since Jessica was already dead when he committed the second part of the crime, the prosecution could not pursue the death penalty. An examination of Greg and Jessica's computers and phones revealed no evidence of a relationship beyond that of stepfather and stepdaughter. The trial began in 2015. District Attorney John Morganelli noted that Greg's lawyer, John McMahon Jr., failed to submit the results of a mental health evaluation for Greg. McMahon claimed that he had Greg evaluated for a possible insanity defense, but the evaluation found that Greg did not have a diminished mental capacity, so McMahon did not use it in the trial. During the trial, the jury was forced to watch a disturbing 6-minute video that Greg had recorded, which showed him committing heinous crimes using adult toys he had purchased the day before. The jury was reluctant to view the video, but the judge ruled that they were obligated to watch it before reaching a verdict. Greg's lawyer argued that the crime was not premeditated and that his client should be charged with a third-degree crime rather than a first-degree crime. In response, Northampton County District Attorney John Morganelli presented the video as evidence to prove that the crime was, in fact, premeditated. Morganelli explained that this was necessary to convince the jurors of Greg's guilt, despite the disturbing nature of the footage. The jury delivered a unanimous verdict in just 6 minutes, finding Gregory Gregg guilty of taking Jessica's life and desecrating her body. As a result, the court sentenced him to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. When asked by the judge if he had any final words, Gregg simply replied, "No, sir. I'm just very sorry." Following the sentencing, the judge advised the jurors to seek counseling from a psychologist to cope with the traumatic case. Jessica's husband, Michael, spoke to reporters, expressing the difficulty of moving on without his beloved wife and raising their 3 children alone. He described Jessica as the most wonderful person he had ever met. In a separate matter, Danelle, Greg's wife, has initiated divorce proceedings. However, the process is proving to be complex and Greg is hindering her efforts. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Michelle Young. Jason Young was born in 1974 in Brevard, North Carolina. Jason grew up in a typical family. After completing high school, he attended the prestigious State University in Raleigh, the state capital. Following graduation, he secured a job as a salesman at a large retail chain. Jason proved to be a valuable and reliable employee, but his friends described him as inconsistent and unpredictable in his relationships with women. He had a reputation for being a womanizer, often changing partners. Michelle Young was born in February 1977 in New York. She was raised in a close-knit family with her younger sister Meredith and their devoted mother Linda. Linda played a significant role in Michelle's early life, nurturing her passions and talents from a young age. Michelle's interests in law and economics were evident from her school days, and she dreamed of pursuing a career in this field. Michelle's academic journey led her to apply to several universities after high school, eventually gaining acceptance into a top university in North Carolina. There, she pursued her master's degree in economics. After completing her education, Michelle secured a prestigious job at a leading accounting firm in the state, rapidly establishing herself as a skilled professional. She achieved financial stability, was able to support herself fully. A chance encounter at a bar on Michelle's birthday, when Jason accidentally spilled a cocktail on her, he immediately apologized and offered to buy her another. This kind and thoughtful act caught Michelle's attention, and they began chatting. As they talked, they discovered that they had a lot in common. They both went to the same college, although Jason graduated 3 years earlier. Their casual conversation quickly turned into a romantic relationship, and they began dating. Although they had deep feelings for each other, they had no plans to get married or move in together. At the time, Jason still lived with his parents in Brevard, while Michelle lived in Raleigh. They would see each other on weekends or during Jason's business trips to Raleigh. During one of their meetings, Michelle dropped a bombshell: she was pregnant. This news came as a shock to both of them, as they were not yet ready to become parents. Jason and Michelle were young and focused on their careers, with no immediate plans to start a family. However, when Michelle became pregnant, she decided to keep the baby after some initial hesitation. Jason took a month to come to terms with the situation and then relocated to be closer to Michelle. After a few months, they got married, but it wasn't due to love or the pregnancy. Instead, it was because Michelle lacked health insurance, and the cost of childbirth would have been prohibitively expensive. Marriage provided a solution to this financial burden. Their daughter, Cassidy Elizabeth, was born in the spring of 2004. Michelle threw herself into domestic life and family responsibilities, with the help of her mother and younger sister. Although Michelle's family was wary of Jason, they tried to avoid conflicts and accepted him as part of their family. Later that year, the young family moved into a large house in a quiet neighborhood. Michelle's mother, Linda, came to visit to help with housework and noticed a tense atmosphere in the home. Jason had a bad temper and often started arguments. Michelle tried to downplay these incidents and appear cheerful. However, she confirmed with her mother the true state of their relationship, which seemed ominous. When Cassidy was just 2 years old, Michelle found out she was pregnant again. She was nervous about sharing the news with her husband, but he took it calmly and even seemed happy. The family decided to visit Jason's parents in Brevard to share the news in person. They spent the weekend celebrating with relatives, and on Monday they left Cassidy with the grandparents for a few hours and went out to dinner to celebrate the event. As they were driving home, Jason, who was driving, overturned and the car went off the road into a ravine. They were left very frightened with a few scrapes and bruises, but their lives were not in danger. However, Michelle had suffered a miscarriage, so Michelle was very worried. Jason was surprisingly calm about the accident. Before the accident, during a business trip, Jason met an old college friend, Michelle Money. She had the same name as Jason's wife, Michelle. Jason told his wife about it. They decided to invite Michelle Money to visit their home, and she agreed. During her visit, Michelle Money began to complain about her unhappy family life. At the same time, Michelle Money kept complimenting Jason and telling his wife that she was lucky to be pregnant. Michelle was not worried about Michelle Money's behavior, but she genuinely wanted to comfort her friend. Jason and Michelle Money began calling each other every day and secretly meeting each other. Jason always justified his absence with business trips, and his wife could not guess anything. Things got complicated in the summer of 2006 when Michelle found out she was pregnant. Unlike her previous pregnancies, Jason's reaction was unhappy and cold. Michelle attributed his sadness to her previous miscarriage, still not knowing the real reason for his cold behavior. In November, with Michelle 5 months pregnant, Jason embarked on a 300-mile business trip. Michelle, who was pregnant, had a lengthy phone conversation with her best friend, discussing family problems and a heated argument she had with her husband the previous night. After the call, her husband left. Jason embarked on a 300-mile business trip. Around 10 p.m., Jason arrived at a hotel, claiming fatigue from his journey. However, instead of resting, he began to carefully examine the hotel's entrances, exits, and security cameras, planning a way to leave and return undetected. He was creating a solid alibi for a crime he intended to commit. Early the next morning, Jason calls Meredith and asks for her help. He tells her that he wants to surprise his wife with a piece of jewelry for their anniversary but accidentally sent the order confirmation to their home fax machine. Jason is worried that Michelle will see the gift and ruin the surprise. Even though Meredith doesn't like Jason, she agrees to help him. Meredith arrived at her sister's house, using a secret door in the garage that only family members knew about and that was always left unlocked. The house was unusually quiet, but Michelle's keys, wallet, and important papers were still in the hallway, suggesting she hadn't left the premises. When Meredith went upstairs, she found the bedroom door wide open, but neither Michelle nor her daughter responded to her calls. When she entered the room, Meredith was met with a horrific scene. Michelle lay on the floor by the bed, her skull fractured and her body surrounded by a large pool of blood. The walls, furniture, and floor were all stained with blood, and tiny footprints were visible next to the body. Sadly, Michelle had been dead for hours. As Meredith rushed to call 911, she heard a faint noise coming from under the bed. When she looked back, she saw Michelle's young daughter, Cassidy, looking at her with a confused expression. Cassidy was unharmed. The little girl had witnessed her mother's brutal death and had spent many hours by her side. A forensic examination of Michelle's body later revealed a series of bruises, abrasions, and broken bones. Her teeth had been broken, and her skull had been fractured by a heavy object. A bloody pillow was found next to her body, with marks suggesting she had been suffocated by the pillow. The murder investigation revealed some crucial facts. First, nothing was stolen from the house, indicating that the killer's sole intention was to murder the Michelle. Furthermore, there were no signs of forced entry or broken locks, suggesting that the perpetrator had a key or knew about a secret door that only family members were aware of. Normally, Jason would be the prime suspect, but in this case, Jason seemed to have a solid alibi. He claimed to have checked into the hotel and not left until the morning, then attended a business meeting. Hotel records confirmed that he used a key card to enter and exit the room. However, upon closer inspection, investigators discovered several irregularities in Jason's alibi. A hotel employee found the fire escape open and propped up with a rock. When investigators reviewed surveillance footage to determine who had propped up the rock, they discovered that the camera had been deliberately disabled on the night of the murder. Jason's room was last recorded about half an hour after he checked in. The strange events continued. Later that night, a man resembling Jason stopped at a gas station between the hotel and the crime scene. When asked to show identification as required by the station's rules, he refused, paid with cash, and hastily left without waiting for his change. The on-call attendant identified Jason, but he denied any involvement, claiming that he had spent the night in the hotel room. His actions, however, raised suspicion. On the day before the tragedy, Jason had made more than 24 calls to his wife, Michelle, and 5 more to his mistress, Michelle Money, each lasting less than 15 seconds, suggesting he was in a state of panic. Notably, these calls were made outside the hotel, contradicting his claim that he had been in the room all night. Additionally, Jason was late for a scheduled business meeting with his partners and appeared distracted. While these incidents were suspicious, they did not prove his guilt, so Jason was able to maintain his normal life for nearly 3 years. He even won custody of his young daughter, which was a huge blow to Michelle's family. Jason's case was reopened in 2012 with new evidence. Witnesses reported seeing his distinctive white car near his home on the night of the murders. A child psychologist testified about Jason's daughter reenacting a disturbing scene with her doll. And Jason's former mistress Michelle Money revealed Jason's mood swings and violent outbursts, and that he had confided in her about his marital woes. This testimony helped convict Jason of brutally assaulting his pregnant wife, and he was sentenced to life in prison without parole. As a result of Jason's actions, his daughter, Cassidy, was left without parents. Her mother was murdered, and her father is in prison for the crime. Cassidy is now being cared for by her aunt and maternal grandparents. Hi there, investigators. It's time to uncover the truth behind another case, the case of Austin Harrouff. Austin Malcolm Harrouff, known by the nickname Golden Boy, was born on December 21, 1996, in Palm Beach, Florida. He was the eldest of 2 children, and was born into a wealthy and respected medical family. His father was a successful dentist with many private clinics, and his mother was a leading pharmaceutical expert. The Harrouff family lived in a spacious, luxurious house by the sea. When Austin was 1.5 years old, his younger sister Haley was born, and the 2 siblings quickly became close. Austin's parents ensured that he and his younger sister received a good education and encouraged personal growth and creative pursuits. Austin excelled at school and had many interests outside of studying. He was passionate about playing guitar, wrestling, football, and acting in an amateur theater group. He saw himself as a creative and ambitious person. Along with his parents and sister, Austin traveled extensively, discovering new places during their vacations. Austin described himself as a cheerful and optimistic person with a strong imagination who excelled in academics and sports through perseverance. However, Austin also admitted that he was very shy, which sometimes made it difficult for him to communicate with his peers. Austin's personal life was interrupted at the age of 13 when his parents decided to divorce. His father moved out of the family home and into a new home with his new partner, eventually marrying her. Meanwhile, Austin remained with his mother, who also found a new partner and married him within a year. Despite facing the emotional challenges of his parents' divorce, Austin continued to excel academically and athletically. Austin always dreamed of becoming a doctor, like his parents, to help others. He was a high-achieving student and was admired by many of his friends. Austin's physical transformation during his youth was remarkable. He grew to be 6 feet 2 inches tall, developed outstanding muscles, and became strong. Austin's charismatic smile and gentle demeanor gave him an almost angelic appearance. However, he still struggled with social anxiety and shyness, which limited his ability to form relationships. In his personal diary, Austin wrote candidly about feeling isolated at school. His classmates called him a nerd and made fun of him, leaving Austin with few friends. Despite these difficulties, he still held out hope that his life would improve once he entered college. Austin looked forward to starting over, forging new relationships, and gaining independence from his parents. The important turning point came when Austin received news that he had been accepted into the University of Florida's prestigious 4-year medical program. This achievement promised to open the door to a successful and rewarding medical career, with the opportunity to continue his studies at any of the top medical schools in the country. Overjoyed by this news, Austin felt like his dream was finally within reach. As he prepared to enter this new chapter, his parents drove him to the college campus in late August. With excitement mixed with trepidation, Austin began his journey to becoming an independent adult, documenting his experiences in his first vlog. During his freshman year, Austin became deeply interested in bodybuilding and spent a significant amount of time in the gym, achieving notable results. He had developed strong muscles, but his success was partly due to steroid use. Austin had openly discussed steroid use in a YouTube vlog he had started in the spring of 2016. Austin had posted various videos to his channel, including discussions about sports and fitness, musical performances with his guitar, and philosophical musings on life. However, over time, his posts became increasingly disturbing. Austin began warning his followers about the dangers of steroids, claiming that they could cause serious mental health consequences and drive a person crazy. Austin had two distinct physical states, a normal state and a state he called crazy. Austin found it difficult to understand these contrasting aspects of himself. Austin had created videos where he spoke in different voices, as if he were other people. Sometimes, Austin's voice changed and he burst into tears for no apparent reason. Experts then reviewed Austin's posts and concluded that Austin was desperately seeking help in each post. As Austin struggled to connect with others during his studies, his blog had become his primary means of expressing himself. Over time, videos recorded him gradually becoming insane. His behavior became increasingly erratic, provocative, and aggressive. Some subscribers suspected he was using banned substances while recording, and they asked him about it in the comment section. Austin denied this, saying it was unhealthy and that he would never use banned substances. However, his behavior showed otherwise. One subscriber even speculated that Austin might have dissociative identity disorder. The sudden changes in Austin were not only manifested in behavior but also in appearance. When he returned home for summer vacation, his mother and sister were shocked by the changes they witnessed. During his year-long separation, Austin had experienced significant physical changes, including significant muscle gain, but these changes were more than superficial. Austin's behavior became increasingly strange. He would say nonsense and claim he didn't need sleep. At first, his family did not take this seriously, but as night fell, they realized he was serious. Austin declared that he would guard the house and protect his family from unknown threats, and he kept his promise, wandering the hallways until morning. Every hour, he loudly checked on his mother and sister, reassuring them that they could sleep peacefully because he was guarding them. The next morning, his mother made him talk seriously and asked him if he had used drugs. Austin admitted that he had tried many different stimulants over the past year and described their effects on him. He even used a powerful synthetic drug that caused hallucinations, rage, and could be fatal if overdosed. However, he promised his mother that he had stopped using and was no longer in danger. Despite her concerns, Austin's mother did not seek help from professionals. As a pharmacist, she thought she could help her son herself. She gave him sedatives and sleeping pills to help him relax and sleep after a long, restless night. However, Austin only slept for a few hours before resuming his vigil, informing his family every hour that everything was quiet and under control. Over several weeks, Austin's behavior continued to deteriorate, but his mother refused to seek professional help from psychiatrists and did not even inform his father about the situation. On the morning of August 13th, Austin unexpectedly visited an old classmate who lived nearby. The classmate was stunned because they hadn't seen each other in over a year and Austin hadn't contacted her. When she asked why he came, Austin explained that he had forgotten the year of his birth and was looking for answers. The confused classmate replied that it was 1996, after which Austin abruptly turned around and left without saying anything. Austin's behavior scared and puzzled the girl, so she immediately called Austin's mother and told her everything, asking if the boy might be using drugs. This prompted the woman to call her ex-husband, who was working in another state, and express her concern that something was seriously wrong with their son. Austin's father flew to Florida the next day and, after speaking with his son, suggested he voluntarily check into a clinic for a medical examination, which Austin firmly refused. Austin's father then had a heartfelt conversation with his ex-wife, and together they decided to send Austin for a mandatory examination and subsequent treatment at a drug rehabilitation or psychiatric facility. However, they couldn't do it in time. A troubling revelation followed. The next day, Austin's friends invited him to join them at the beach because of the hot and sunny weather. His mother insisted that Haley accompany him to keep an eye on her brother. Austin was excited about the outing but dressed as if he were going to the mountains instead of the beach. He wore a thick athletic hoodie, long pants, boots, and ski goggles. When his friends saw him, they were silent at first, then burst into laughter. They teased him about his outfit and asked if he was okay. Austin became angry and shouted that if they thought he was crazy, he would prove it by threatening their lives. Austin's friend didn't take him seriously but stepped back just in case. Haley noticed Austin was on the edge of a breakdown and decided to talk to him to calm him down. In a private conversation, Austin confided to Harley that he believed he was half wild animal, immortal, and had superhuman strength. This frightened her, but she stayed calm to avoid provoking him. At the beach, Austin behaved normally. He joked, laughed, played volleyball, and had fun with his friends. As evening came, they all said goodbye and went their separate ways. Austin and Haley walked to a small restaurant near the coast to meet their father and his current wife. On the way, Austin told Haley he wanted to test his immortality by crossing a busy highway directly through the fast-moving traffic. When Haley realized what was happening, she chased after Austin and physically pulled him away, urging him to hurry because they were expected. Austin agreed that they shouldn't keep anyone waiting and quietly followed his sister. During dinner, Austin acted strangely again, getting up from the table several times to go outside, looking around as if he was afraid of someone, then returning. He then decided to tell his father and stepmother about his belief in his immortality. When his father calmly suggested seeking professional help, Austin leaped up, shouted that he wasn't insane, pushed his father forcefully, and ran out of the restaurant. After leaving the restaurant, Austin walked several miles and eventually wandered into a neighborhood he didn't recognize. There, an open garage with bright lights caught his attention, and he headed towards it. This home belonged to an elderly couple, 59-year-old John Stevens and 56-year-old Michelle Mishkin Stevens. In the evenings, they loved barbecuing and watching movies in their spacious garage, which they had set up like a living room. Married for over 25 years, they had 3 adult children who lived independently, allowing them to enjoy retirement and each other's company. That evening, John took their dog for a walk while Michelle prepared for their usual movie night. When Michelle noticed an unfamiliar young man on their lawn, she felt no threat and even asked if he needed help. However, the situation unexpectedly took a turn. Jeffrey Pfizer, the Stevens family neighbor who lived across the street, was on friendly terms with them. Around 9 p.m., he heard suspicious noises outside. When he looked into the yard, he suddenly heard Michelle's agonizing scream. Without hesitation, he rushed to help his neighbors and saw Austin near the garage. Jeffrey tried to pull Austin away, but Austin was overpoweringly strong and knocked Jeffrey to the ground. As Jeffrey tried to recover, Austin stabbed him several times in the back and shoulder. Realizing he was overpowered and needed help, Jeffrey ran into the Stevens family house to draw Austin's attention away from himself. After exiting through the back door, Jeffrey headed to his own home. Once inside, Jeffrey realized Austin had not followed him but had returned to attack Michelle. Jeffrey immediately called the police and emergency medical services, reporting an armed attack by a stranger with a knife and stating that both he and his elderly neighbor had been injured. After contacting emergency services, Jeffrey fell silent, listening closely. He eventually realized no one was outside his door. It seemed Austin had remained at Stephen family's house, and now strange animal-like noises, resembling the growls of a wild beast, could be heard along with screams of terror and moans. It took the police about 10 minutes to arrive. But by then, it was tragically too late. The sight that awaited them was horrifying. Two officers approached the garage with weapons drawn, only to be halted in shock at the doorway. There, in a pool of blood, lay the lifeless body of Michelle Stevens. The autopsy later revealed she had suffered multiple blunt force traumas to the head and a stab wound to the chest. A bit further inside, in the dim light, two more individuals were on the ground. John was reaching out, pleading for help with a strained voice. Above him, Austin was seemingly choking him. The officers demanded that Austin release the victim, threatening him with their guns. However, Austin showed no response, and firing was too risky due to the possibility of hitting both people. Instead, one officer drew a taser and warned Austin. Only then did he see that Austin was not just assaulting but actually biting John's face, holding his head and neck firmly. Beneath John spread a vast pool of blood, with a chunk of flesh missing from his left cheek. And his lip, nose, and ear were also mutilated and seemingly chewed off. John was immobilized, barely able to move, silently pleading for help. The officers shocked the attacker with the taser, but he seemed unaffected, continuing to tear at John's face with his teeth. A kick to Austin's face only made him growl loudly and bite into Stevens's cheek again. Reinforcements arrived, including a police dog that was unleashed on the frenzied young man. The dog latched onto Austin's arm, but he seemed to feel no pain, breaking free and injuring himself further. A powerful kick from an officer finally disoriented Austin long enough to handcuff him. At this moment, Austin claimed he felt unwell, possibly having eaten something bad, before losing consciousness and convulsing. Emergency medical teams transported 4 individuals from the scene. Unfortunately, Michelle could not survive, and her husband John passed away on the way to the hospital due to severe blood loss from stab wounds and the trauma from the attack. Jeffrey, who reported the incident, survived, but he experienced permanent minor motor skill impairment in his right hand due to nerve and tendon damage. Austin fell into a coma after mistakenly ingesting a substance from a garage bottle, thinking it was alcohol, which turned out to be a chemical. He suffered severe burns to his esophagus and stomach and spent several days in critical condition, but medical professionals ultimately saved him. Austin, the attacker, spent nearly 2 weeks in a coma. Upon regaining consciousness, he claimed to remember nothing about the events of that day. Gradually, he began to recall having dinner at a restaurant and an argument with his father, after which he walked away. Austin described seeing a ghostly figure that guided him through dark alleys and unfamiliar neighborhoods until he saw a light in the distance. The light came from a lantern near Stephen family's garage, where John was preparing a barbecue and setting out food. When Michelle saw him, she was startled and called for help. Austin admitted to hitting her several times and then pulled out a knife, claiming he would rid her of evil. At that moment, a neighbor named Jeffrey Fisher intervened, but Austin, thinking Jeffrey was a demon, attacked him with the knife. After Jeffrey ran to get help, Austin continued to assault the woman until she was lifeless. He then noticed a bottle, mistook it for alcohol, and drank about half of it. Soon after, he heard a dog barking and a man's voice. Austin claimed he couldn't remember what happened next, according to his own statements. Initially, there was speculation that Austin was under the influence of strong drugs, which could explain his aggression and lack of sensitivity to pain. However, hospital tests showed no traces of drugs, medication, or alcohol in his blood. This led to the conclusion that Austin might have experienced a psychotic break, acting without awareness of his actions. Experienced psychiatrists were tasked with determining the truth of this claim. The case of Austin Harrouff attracted significant media attention due to its extreme brutality and ambiguity, both in the courtroom and psychiatric care. The children of the murdered couple, along with the relatives of the injured neighbor, believed that the young man was pretending to be insane and claiming memory loss to be declared incompetent and avoid harsh punishment. Most people following the case shared this belief. The state-appointed psychological and psychiatric expert, Dr. Landrum, reported that Austin's mental illness led to an acute psychotic episode, resulting in the deaths of Michelle and John. However, the prosecutor argued in court that he did not believe the defendant met the legal definition of insanity at the time of the crime. It was suggested that Austin's mental health had worsened due to experimenting with various drugs, using steroids, and having trouble socializing with peers since school. However, at the time of the crime, he was not under the influence of any illegal substances or alcohol, as none were found in his blood, indicating that the reasons for his violent behavior were another reason. During a court hearing, Austin's father disclosed that their family has a history of schizophrenia, and he worried that his son might have inherited this serious illness. Additionally, Austin was suspected of having clinical lycanthropy delusion, a rare disorder. This might explain why he acted like a wild animal and seemed immune to pain, although no psychiatrist confirmed this diagnosis. After receiving treatment, Austin was moved to jail, but the case remains unresolved. He is still awaiting trial, and his lawyers argue that he is mentally ill. Meanwhile, the relatives of John and Michelle and Jeffrey have expressed hopes in interviews that Austin will be deemed competent and sentenced to death for his terrible actions. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Zoe Hastings. Zoe Hastings was born on November 21, 1996, in Kansas, as the oldest of 5 children. She was a responsible sibling, often putting her parents' needs before her own. Her family was deeply rooted in their faith, spending a significant amount of time at church. When Zoe was in high school, her family moved to Dallas, where she attended a school that fostered her creativity and passion for the arts. She excelled in drawing and enjoyed participating in school plays. Outside of school, Zoe worked at an art studio and as a lifeguard during her summer breaks. After graduating, Zoe had the opportunity to attend top universities, but she decided to delay her education to focus on her church. In October 2015, at the age of 18, Zoe was preparing for a mission trip with her church. She planned to attend the Sunday service to discuss the trip's details. Zoe left her house around 4:40 p.m. in the family minivan, promising her parents she would return for dinner. However, she failed to come back, which was unusual for her. Zoe's parents tried to reach her after the service, but she didn't respond to their messages or calls. They then contacted her friends, thinking she might have visited someone, but no one had seen her. As the evening wore on, her parents grew increasingly worried and decided to call the church to see if Zoe had shown up there. However, they were surprised to learn that Zoe had never arrived at the church. This was highly unusual behavior for Zoe, as she had always kept her parents informed of her current whereabouts and had never disappeared without explanation. So they drove themselves to the police station to report Zoe missing, and the police began the search. The police spent all night retracing the route from Zoe's house to the church but found no sign of Zoe. Using an iPhone tracking app, police were able to locate her phone. They discovered Zoe's phone just a few hundred yards from the church, near a small creek across the street. Zoe's parents rushed to the creek. An officer approached them and informed them that a car accident had been reported a few hours earlier and that police had received a call from a witness walking a dog. That witness claimed that a man had approached him and said that a woman had been injured in a car accident near the creek. The witness rushed to the scene and found a woman lying in a pool of blood, so he called 911. As the police investigated, they quickly identified the victim as Zoe Hastings. However, it soon became clear that she had not died as a result of the accident. The evidence suggested that she had been murdered. Zoe's body was found a short distance from the minivan, which was partially submerged in the creek. There was a significant amount of blood near her body, and police observed multiple cuts on her neck. Her dress was pulled up, and her underwear was rolled down, leading detectives to suspect that the killer had likely assaulted and abused her. The police prevented Zoe's parents from approaching her body, shielding them from the gruesome scene. As they investigated further, they discovered several clues. Notably, all the minivan doors except the driver's side were locked, suggesting that the perpetrator may have driven the vehicle themselves or approached Zoe directly at the scene. Beneath the bridge, about 10 feet from the creek, a blood-stained knife was discovered. It's likely that this was the weapon used in Zoe's murder. By examining her phone records and GPS data, investigators established that Zoe had arrived at the creek by 5:01 p.m. after leaving home at 4:41 p.m. GPS revealed she drove there in approximately 20 minutes, indicating her death probably occurred within a few minutes of arrival. To account for this timeline, investigators reconstructed her activities that afternoon, tracing her stops from leaving her home. During the examination, investigators uncovered evidence. Zoe visited the nearby DVD rental store after departing home. To return a DVD she borrowed from that rental shop situated beside a Walgreens, near her place of residence. More than 50 people near that area had confirmed it. Among them had been Lester Clark, a tattoo shop employee who had worked next door to the DVD store. It wasn't until a few hours after work around 4:45 p.m. that Lester revealed he had seen a female customer who had been shopping at the store and had approached her. Lester admitted to having witnessed Zoe going to the DVD rental store. Lester added that he saw a man behaving suspiciously near the crime scene. Lester described the man as short and heavily built, and African American. However, Lester was too far away to notice any other distinguishing features. Later that evening, Lester saw the same man walking towards the store alone. The second witness, Gary Whitman, a homeless man, corroborated Lester's account. At around 4:45 p.m., Gary saw a woman approaching a white minivan in the parking lot. A man then approached her from behind, preventing her from entering the vehicle. The man showed her something from his pocket, and the woman subsequently got into the car, moving to the passenger seat. The man then drove away. Gary also described the suspect as short and heavily built, and African American, and found the situation highly suspicious. He went into the store and asked the clerk to call 911, but it is unclear if the clerk made the call. During the investigation, experts made several key discoveries. A forensic pathologist examined Zoe's body and found a small amount of male semen, indicating that Zoe had been sexually assaulted before being murdered. However, the amount of semen was too small to conduct a full DNA analysis. Investigators analyzed Zoe's car for any foreign fingerprints on the doors or steering wheel, but found none. This discovery, combined with witness statements, suggested that the killer may have driven Zoe away in her minivan. However, the lack of fingerprints did not mean that the killer did not drive the car, as they may have wiped down the surfaces after the crime. When examining Zoe's body, investigators found several hairs, but they were too small to extract a full DNA sample from. However, a breakthrough came when a DNA sample was found on a knife near the crime scene. The DNA was matched to 34-year-old Antonio Cochran, who had a violent criminal history, including arrests for theft, assault, and home invasion. 1 year before the murder, Antonio was accused of sexually assaulting a 17-year-old girl, the daughter of his girlfriend. According to the girl, Antonio offered her a ride, but took her to a secluded area and assaulted her. He was arrested and claimed that the sex was consensual, but the prosecution was unable to prove his guilt, and he was acquitted. Antonio became the prime suspect in the murder investigation. As a result, he was arrested. However, during the interrogation, Antonio denied any involvement in the crime. To gather more evidence, investigators collected a DNA sample from Antonio and compared it to the semen found on the victim's body. Unfortunately, both DNA samples were too small for a full analysis, so the experts used a different method. The partial DNA profiles from the hair and semen were then compared to Antonio's DNA. The results showed that it was match, but not definitively. Meanwhile, detectives searched Antonio's smartphone and found some incriminating text messages. On the day before the murder, Antonio sent a message to a friend he lived with, stating he was moving out and would never see him again. At 1:48 a.m. the next day, Antonio sent another message to his ex-girlfriend, telling her that his stepmother had died right in front of him. But this information was later found to be false. In the hour leading up to Zoe's death, Antonio sent 2 texts to another woman, revealing that he had been drinking, driving around the city, and crying. These messages were his last before the incident. Later that evening, at 9:30 p.m., Antonio texted a friend, expressing confusion and despair about his life. The next day, he sent a message to his ex-girlfriend, stating that his life was over and that she would soon understand why. Detectives investigating Antonio's online activities found that he had visited local news websites over 30 times before his arrest, with a particular focus on the crime sections. Notably, 5 of these access were directly related to articles about Zoe's murder. This was unusual, as prior to the death of Zoe, Antonio rarely visited news sites. His browser history also showed a single visit to a page about gang activity. Further investigation of Antonio's smartphone revealed GPS data that, at 4:34 p.m., Antonio's phone connected to a cell tower covering the area where the store was located, coinciding with the time Zoe was there. Although this data was not conclusive evidence, it suggested that Antonio's phone was in the vicinity of the store just minutes before Zoe left the parking lot. This was significant, as Antonio's home was far away, and his phone had been connected to a different nearby tower throughout the day. Detectives discovered that Antonio had started working at a grocery store just 3 days before the incident. However, on the day after the murder, he skipped his shift without providing any explanation. Despite the extensive circumstantial evidence against Antonio, the strongest evidence remained his DNA on the knife handle. Nevertheless, this evidence alone might not be enough for a conviction, as merely holding a knife does not prove involvement in the murder. It is possible that Antonio used the knife in a different context, and someone else could have used it to commit the crime. Since no other evidence was found, detectives decided to proceed with the case and take it to court. The prosecution presented its report of the events. According to the prosecution, Antonio approached Zoe in the parking lot, threatening her with a knife and forcing her to get into her car. He then took the driver's seat and drove away. The prosecution argued that Antonio, who was emotionally distressed due to the death of a relative and intoxicated from consuming a significant amount of alcohol. The investigators' theory was that Antonio had intended to assault Zoe when he abducted her. He chose his victim, Zoe, by chance when he spotted her in the parking lot. Antonio saw an opportunity to commit a crime and acted on it. He then drove to a secluded creek area that was difficult to spot due to the surrounding trees and low-lying terrain. At this location, he forced Zoe out of the car and attacked her, stabbing her 6 times in the neck area. Antonio got back into the car and tried to drive it into the creek, possibly to hide any remaining evidence. However, the car only partially submerged, allowing Antonio to potentially wipe his fingerprints from the steering wheel and door handle before fleeing the scene and return to the store, where Lester had seen him according to initial testimony. The defense argued that most of the evidence was not convincing enough and did not prove Antonio's guilt. For example, hair analysis only showed that the DNA could not be ruled out as belonging to Antonio. But it did not confirm his involvement. DNA on the knife also did not necessarily prove that Antonio committed murder. The defense argued that Antonio could have touched the knife under different circumstances before working at the store. They suggested he might have used the knife while working at a movie theater, where he sometimes collected items left behind by visitors. However, there was no evidence to support this claim. Furthermore, if someone had taken the knife from the theater and used it to commit the murder, they would have had to be careful to avoid removing Antonio's DNA from the handle, which would have been a difficult task. The defense attempted to downplay the testimony of the second witness, Gary, by revealing that Gary had a warrant for his arrest due to a parole violation. They tried to exclude Gary's testimony, but the prosecution argued that Gary's willingness to cooperate with police, despite the risk of arrest, proved his sincerity. Gary insisted he wanted to do the right thing, even if it meant getting arrested. Antonio's lawyers argued that their client was elsewhere at the time of Zoe's murder in order to helping a friend, but they failed to provide any substantial evidence to support this claim. Initially, the prosecution sought the death penalty for Antonio, but as the trial progressed, they realized this would be difficult to achieve with the available evidence. They dropped the request for the death penalty. After a lengthy deliberation, the jury found Antonio guilty of murder and sentenced him to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 30 years. Zoe's parents expressed gratitude to the investigators and all those involved in the trial for delivering justice for their daughter. Her father shared that he had always warned his children about the dangers of the world and had taken every precaution to protect them. However, despite his efforts, his eldest daughter was abducted just a short distance from their home, and he was powerless to prevent it. Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another perplexing mystery. The case of Jessica Dishon. Jessica Dishon was born on May 2, 1982, in the small town of Shepherdsville, Kentucky. As the eldest of 3 children, Jessica took on significant responsibilities from a young age, helping her parents care for her 2 younger brothers while they worked. At age 15, Jessica started working part-time at a restaurant to save money to buy her first car, a red Pontiac. A few years later, she bought the car she wanted. Despite her job, Jessica excelled in school and began planning to attend college, where she hoped to study accounting. In the fall of 1999, 17-year-old Jessica was about to start her senior year of high school. She had also started dating a boy, which made her very happy. On the morning of Friday, September 10th, Jessica's parents went to work, and her younger brothers caught the bus to school. However, Jessica did not leave for school as planned. Later that day, around noon, Jessica's mother returned home from work and noticed something unusual. Jessica's car was still parked in front of the house. The mother went to Jessica's room, thinking that maybe she had overslept and missed school. But Jessica was not in her bedroom. The mother then considered the possibility that Jessica might have gotten a ride to school from her father, so she called him to ask. However, he told her that he had gone to work alone that morning. Jessica's mother suspected something was wrong with her car, so she took out a spare key to try to start the car. When she approached the car, the driver's door was slightly open, and Jessica's cell phone was lying on the seat with the numbers 9 and 1 displayed on the screen, indicating that she had tried to call 911. Jessica's shoes and keys were found under the front seat, while her textbooks, work clothes, and purse were in the back seat. Jessica's mother was worried about Jessica's safety. It was obvious that she had tried to call for help but was unsuccessful. Furthermore, Jessica could not leave her belongings in the car and leave. Jessica's parents contacted her school, learning that Jessica had not come to class that day. When Jessica's best friend at work called her parents a few hours later, saying that Jessica had not come to work, they became even more worried about Jessica. Jessica's parents immediately contacted the police, but the sheriff downplayed the situation, suggesting that Jessica might have wandered off and would return home on her own. Despite Jessica's parents' pleas, the sheriff refused to open an investigation. Undeterred, Jessica's parents contacted relatives, friends, and acquaintances, but no one had any information about Jessica's whereabouts. They then searched the entire town, scouring the area, but there was no sign of her. The next morning, Jessica's parents returned to the sheriff's office to report that she had not returned home. The sheriff sent 2 officers to check Jessica's car. However, the officers searched the car without wearing gloves, potentially destroying evidence. Furthermore, the officers did not search Jessica's room. Feeling frustrated with the police, Jessica's parents sought the help of the local media, hoping to draw attention to Jessica's disappearance and the police's lack of attention. Jessica's family and friends, led by her father and Uncle Stanley, launched a search for Jessica. They also distributed flyers with information about Jessica. Fearing the worst, they focused their search on an area near a river, which was known to be a crime hub. For hours, Jessica's family members thoroughly searched the challenging terrain near the river but couldn't find any sign of Jessica. The next morning, Jessica's parents were at home, and their son was playing in the yard. Suddenly, he rushed inside, saying he had heard a faint cry for help that sounded exactly like his sister's voice. Jessica's father immediately grabbed his gun and ran outside to find the source of the screams. At the same time, his brother arrived and joined the search. They quickly noticed smoke coming from the property of their neighbor, 40-year-old David Brooks. As they approached, they saw Brooks undressing on his property. Jessica's father asked Brooks for permission to search his farm, but Brooks refused and told them to leave. This was not the only unusual behavior Brooks displayed. Before Jessica's disappearance, the 2 families had a normal relationship. However, soon after, he would drive slowly past their house, staring at them with an ominous smile. After seeing Brooks burning clothes on their property, Jessica's parents went back to the police, shared their concerns and asked them to come and meet Brooks with the dogs. The police agreed. The dogs were given some of Jessica's clothes to track her scent. They led the police to Brooks's fire pit, but no significant evidence was found. However, the dogs did find black gloves in one of Brooks's sheds that smelled like decomposition. During the search, no concrete evidence was found. Frustrated with the police, Jessica's father contacted the FBI for help. The FBI usually does not get involved in missing persons cases based on the family's request, but this time they decided to investigate immediately. After Jessica's parents presented the case and the family's findings, the FBI opened a full-scale investigation. The FBI proceeded to collect fingerprints from Jessica's room and her car, confiscating all potential evidence for further analysis. Additionally, investigators conducted a comprehensive search of the area using helicopters and volunteers. They thoroughly examined the pond near Jessica's home. The FBI searched Brooks' farm and found a printed photo of Jessica. This discovery led the FBI to strongly suspect Brooks' involvement in her disappearance. They also suspected his 35-year-old brother, Joseph, although despite a thorough search, the FBI found no evidence. Due to lack of incriminating evidence, the investigation focused on searching the surrounding area. 17 days after Jessica went missing, police received a call on September 27th. A woman was driving along a road near the river. Noticing something unusual near a tree, the woman stopped to check and was horrified to see a body. She called the police immediately. When FBI agents arrived, they discovered the body of a young woman who had suffered severe trauma. She was missing several fingers and toes. A rope tied around her legs showed traces of red and silver paint. Additionally, some of her clothing was missing, suggesting that she may have been sexually assaulted, leading the FBI to develop disturbing theories about the murder. Medical experts later confirmed the identity and determined that Jessica had been strangled. Her body also showed extensive bruising. Her limbs and fingers had been separated after death, suggesting that she was still alive when this happened. However, the most disturbing fact was that Jessica had survived for approximately 3 days after she went missing. This meant that the police had the opportunity to rescue her. But unfortunately, they did not take any action to do so. After the body was discovered, the FBI re-interviewed Brooks, who changed his story. He initially said he had seen Jessica near her home, but later said he had not seen her. His alibi was disputed by his wife, and he failed a polygraph test, prompting the FBI to arrest him and proceed to trial. The FBI said the likelihood of a conviction was low due to a lack of concrete evidence. While they had some troubling clues that pointed to his involvement, they were circumstantial and inconclusive. As the trial progressed, detectives continued to search for additional evidence. During a re-examination of Brooks' car, they found a rope similar to the one used to tie Jessica up. However, analysis showed no DNA on the rope. Brooks' trial began in January 2003. His attorney maintained his innocence, citing a lack of evidence. During the trial, it was revealed that investigators had found the victim's missing limbs but had not properly preserved them, causing them to decompose and lose potential evidence. The remaining circumstantial evidence was insufficient to convict, and the jury was unable to reach a unanimous decision, resulting in Brooks' acquittal. Under state law, he could only be brought back if new evidence was discovered. Jessica's parents were devastated by the outcome. The parents also felt that if the police had done their job properly, Jessica might still be alive. Over time, the case went cold and was largely abandoned, leaving the family without closure. In 2012, a new detective, Lynn Hunt, joined the local police department and was tasked with reviewing unsolved cases. Lynn Hunt began by examining the murder case of Jessica. However, she was shocked to find that the original investigation was poorly handled, with case files containing errors and lacking key information from interviews with relevant parties. The evidence was also not properly documented, forcing Lynn Hunt to start the investigation from scratch 13 years after the crime. Hunt met with Jessica's family and obtained a box of her belongings that had been kept in her car at the time of the murder. One of her brothers, now an adult, had kept the box since the police returned the items to the family. Lynn Hunt was again disappointed by the careless handling of the evidence, as it had not been stored according to protocol. Her efforts paid off when she discovered a crucial document, Brooks' medical examination report, which revealed that Brooks had an IQ of 61, which is considered low. With a low IQ, Brooks may not have fully understood the questions and may have given incomplete answers. All of this led Lynn Hunt to think that this man might not have anything to do with the case. Lynn Hunt began to consider other suspects. Lynn Hunt conducted an extensive review of everyone connected to the case and those living in the surrounding area. This investigation continued until September 2014, nearly 15 years after Jessica's death. A coworker contacted Lynn Hunt with information about an inmate at the Kentucky State Prison who claimed to know who killed Jessica. Lynn Hunt initially dismissed the information as unreliable. Many inmates make up stories to get released early. However, Lynn Hunt verified the information before dismissing it. Lynn Hunt visited the prison and met a man who told her that he had previously shared a cell with another inmate. During conversations, the inmate revealed to him that he was responsible for the murder of Jessica Dishon. The informant revealed that Stanley Dishon, Jessica Dishon's uncle, had a dark secret. According to the informant, Stanley confessed to years of sexual abuse of Jessica while they lived under the same roof. He warned her that if she spoke about the abuse, he would kill her or someone she cared about. When Jessica started dating in the spring of 1999, Stanley became increasingly fearful that she might confide in her boyfriend about the abuse she had suffered at his hands. On September 10th, Stanley visited Jessica at her home when she was alone, and he saw her packing her belongings into her car. He approached her and asked her to end her relationship with her boyfriend. However, Jessica refused, threatening to expose Stanley's actions if he did not leave her alone. As Stanley threatened her, causing Jessica to reach for the phone to call 911. Stanley tried to grab her, but she broke free and ran back to her room. Stanley followed her into her room, striking her before binding her with her own sheets. Stanley then dragged her to an abandoned shed not far from where her body would later be discovered. Stanley held Jessica captive for several days, subjecting her to abuse and torture before ultimately killing her. Stanley then placed her body in a visible location near the road and buried the bloody sheets under the shed. Additionally, Stanley removed some of Jessica's limbs in an attempt to mislead the police, making it seem like the murder was the work of drug traffickers. Lynn Hunt was intrigued to discover that this crucial detail about the missing limbs had never been made public. Only Jessica's closest relatives were aware that her body had been mutilated, which meant the informant couldn't have fabricated this information. Furthermore, Stanley claimed to have buried Jessica's shoe under a broken tree near the shed. Determined to verify the informant's story, Lynn Hunt decided to search for buried evidence. With limited resources at the local police department, she enlisted the help of Jessica's brother and other relatives, keeping Stanley's possible guilt a secret. She did not report her suspected evidence to them. On the first day of the search, no clues were found despite searching the areas described by the informant. The next day, Jessica's brother and Lynn Hunt returned to the scene. On the way, they noticed an abandoned barn on the side of the road and decided to search. Inside the barn, they began digging. Their search uncovered a buried bed sheet. Lynn Hunt collected the evidence and rushed to Jessica's home. Since her disappearance, her parents had left her room unchanged, which helped in verifying the evidence. Upon comparison, Lynn Hunt confirmed that the bed sheet was indeed from Jessica's bedding, as it matched the pattern of the other linens and was missing from her bed. Following this discovery, Stanley was arrested and questioned by police. Although he appeared visibly shaken during questioning, he refused to confess to the crime. Stanley was eventually charged with murder and the case went to trial. This news shocked Jessica's father. The murderer he had been searching for was none other than his own brother Stanley Dishon. As the trial progressed, Lynn Hunt dug into Stanley's past to gather more evidence. She knew that he had assaulted Jessica, but her investigation uncovered that several of Stanley's female relatives had come forward to report that he had sexually abused them as children. Stanley would approach his relatives, claiming he was temporarily homeless, and asked to stay at their home. However, when left alone with the young girls in their homes, Stanley would sexually assault them, threatening them to ensure their silence. Based on multiple similar accounts, police deduced that Stanley had been engaging in this behavior for approximately 3 decades. Lynn Hunt knew full well that a conviction for murder would be difficult, given the lack of direct evidence, such as fingerprints or DNA, linking Stanley to the crime. Undeterred, Lynn Hunt continued her investigation and stumbled upon a box of old case files that had not been examined before. As she sifted through the boxes, Lynn Hunt was once again frustrated with the police who had originally handled the case. She noticed a letter dated June 26, 2002. A concerned person had written to the police at the time, recounting a story identical to one Lynn Hunt later heard from an inmate at the Kentucky penitentiary. In the summer of 2002, Stanley was serving a sentence for assaulting a minor family member. While in prison, he confided in a fellow inmate about killing his niece, Jessica. Unbeknownst to Stanley, his fellow inmate was a police informant who soon wrote a detailed letter to the police investigating the case, exposing the horrific events surrounding Jessica's death. However, police believed Brooks was the prime suspect at the time, causing them to ignore other potential leads. This inaction left Lynn Hunt deeply frustrated, becoming frustrated with the lack of professionalism of his colleagues. If the police had done their job properly, this case could have been solved in 2002. After all these years, Lynn Hunt could only hope that Stanley would finally face justice for his actions at the upcoming trial. The process began in 2015 when Stanley appeared in court, pleading not guilty. Jessica's parents were furious. The prosecution believed that a guilty verdict on the murder charges would be difficult due to a lack of evidence. There were also assault charges against other female family members. The prosecution would need these family members to testify in court, sharing explicit details about Stanley's actions against them. Given these challenges, the prosecution decided to offer Stanley a plea deal. In exchange for dropping the death penalty, Stanley would have to plead guilty to both the assaults on his relatives and Jessica's murder. Ultimately, Stanley accepted the deal and pleaded guilty. Jessica's parents, who wanted the truth, were unhappy with this arrangement, but Stanley remained silent in accordance with the terms of the plea deal. Stanley was sentenced to 20 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 15 years. Since he was 56 years old at the time of his conviction, he could be released at age 71. Hi there, investigators. It's time to uncover the truth behind another case. The case of Anel Baez Alvarez. Anel Baez Alvarez was born on March 17, 1998, in Guamachil, Sinaloa, Mexico. She grew up in a family with her father, Aide Alvarez, her mother, Hugo Beza, her brother Omar, and her sister, Aiden. As a child, Anel developed naturally and did not encounter any serious problems. Although she was initially a reserved child, over time, she became confident and charming, always trying to please those around her. Anel's father worked as a tailor, and the family lived a prosperous, close-knit, and happy life. However, everything changed when Anel's mother was diagnosed with cancer in the early 2010s. The whole family took care of her during her difficult treatment. After his wife passed away, the family was deeply hurt, but they did not give up and continued to support each other through the pain. This tragedy brought Anel and Aiden closer together, and they shared everything with each other. During the difficult times, Anel maintained a cheerful and friendly spirit. When she entered high school, she became an ideal daughter, managed the housework excellently, always took care of her younger sister, and got good grades in school. One of her hobbies was cooking for her family. Anel overcame her shyness and became one of the most popular girls at school. She formed a band and became the lead singer, developing a love for love songs, especially the ballad Amore Eterno. At that time, Anel also met her best friend, at least for a while. It was Erunde Elizabeth Gutierrez. They became an inseparable pair, admired by everyone around them and considered the most popular girls at school. Anel and Erunde expressed their friendship through social media. On October 14, 2012, Anel posted a photo with Erunde, expressing her joy at their friendship. She thanked God for giving her the opportunity to be close to Erunde and even considered Erunde a sister. However, as time passed, Anel and Erunde's relationship began to change. Despite being the same age, Anel and Erunde's personalities were completely different. Anel was a sweet girl who enjoyed listening to love songs and spending time with her family. Meanwhile, Erunde lived in a dysfunctional family environment and became increasingly involved in the urban youth culture, commonly known as Guado, in Mexico. Erunde regularly attended musical events, such as the Calibre 50 concert at the closing ceremony of the Carnival in Guamachil in 2014. Arunday had clear political views, having shared on social media about attending a march in support of Joaquin Guzman Lora, also known as El Chapo. It is worth noting that Arunday often expressed her views on social media, unlike her friend Anil. The distance between Anil and Arunday grew over time. In 2014, Anil and Arunday both attended the Guamachil High School of the Autonomous University of Sinaloa, but they no longer interacted as closely as before. Instead, each created their own new group of friends. Anil became close to friends like Melissa, Karim, Manuel, and Maria Jose, who shared the same lifestyle as she did. She was often admired and loved by her group of friends, especially Maria Jose, who had known Anil since elementary school. Anil was always caring and helpful to the members of the group. She was also known for being polite and tidy. However, Arunday began to show a completely different personality on social media. She posted negative and disturbing content on her page, some of which was very alarming. Some of the posts looked like threats and did not make any sense at first. This raised concerns and suggested that Arunday might have serious mental health issues. Arunday's posts did not stop and became more and more suspicious. On March 3rd, Arunday posted another message saying, "Maybe not now, and not tomorrow, but soon. I assure you, I will not tell her anything then, but know that I have destroyed you mentally." Arunday's last post was dated March 16th, in which she wrote, "This really makes me desperate." However, no one knew who these threats were directed at. Rumors began to spread around the school that Arunday was angry with an old friend named Anil because they were no longer friends. Some even accused Arunday of being jealous of her old friend because everyone liked Anil. However, Anil did not care about what Arunday posted on social media. She celebrated her birthday with a big party, and everything in her life seemed perfect. But everything changed on March 19th when Anil did not pick up her youngest sister as usual. Hugo, Anil's father, received a call from the school informing him that his youngest daughter had not been picked up by Anil as usual. At first, he was not too worried and thought that Anil might have overslept or gone out with friends after school. But when he decided to call Anil to check if everything was okay, there was no response. Hugo thought that Anil might still be asleep after picking up her sister. He tried to contact Anil again but received no response. Despite repeated calls, she remained silent, causing Hugo's anxiety to increase. Hugo decided to go home to the Los Fuentes area. When he arrived, he found the front door wide open. Entering the living room, Hugo saw that some of the furniture had been moved, leading him to suspect that a robbery had taken place. He called Anil's name and searched the house desperately for her, but she did not respond. Hugo eventually went to Anil's room and tried to open the door but found it locked, which only added to his worries. Hugo knocked on the door several times but received no response from Anil. So, he broke the door open and entered. What he saw took his breath away. On the floor was Anil's lifeless body. He immediately called the police, who arrived quickly at the scene. When they entered the house, they found Hugo and his 10-year-old daughter sitting upstairs, deeply saddened. The police followed Hugo to a room where they discovered the body of his 16-year-old daughter, Anil. The police found that Anil's body had multiple wounds, and there was blood on the floor. It seemed that the attacker had tried to clean up the blood but failed. Through the autopsy, forensic experts discovered that Anil had been stabbed a total of 65 times. The police believed that the attacker had a close relationship with Anil. This theory was further supported by the fact that the doors and windows showed no signs of forced entry, leading them to believe that Anil knew the attacker and had let them into the house. They even speculated that Anil might have arranged a meeting with the attacker that day. However, when detectives checked Anil's cell phone, they found no information about her inviting anyone to her home. Therefore, they considered it might have been a chance encounter. Since there were no surveillance cameras in the area, detectives decided to interview neighbors. Some reported seeing a slim girl with black hair leaving the house. These statements narrowed down the suspects, and the police focused on a specific individual. They began questioning Annel's close relatives and discovered that they all had solid alibis. They claimed that Annel had no enemies and was very friendly, so they could not imagine anyone wanting to harm her. However, detectives noticed a social media post by Arunde, who expressed surprise at Annel's death. Some people expressed their condolences, but others criticized Arunde and accused her of being the murderer. They posted harsh comments, accusing Arunde of guilt. Arunde deleted her account, but the police were able to gather information in time. They summoned some of Annel's friends to ask about the connection between Annel and Arunde. All of them stated that the two had become estranged and that Arunde seemed jealous of Annel because Annel was more popular. After the interviews, detectives accessed Arunde's social media profiles and found threatening posts she had written months earlier. But the most notable was a post written just hours after Annel's death, in which Arunde wrote, "I was so stupid. Oh my God, what did I do?" Everything seemed to indicate that Arunde had become the sole suspect in the case. However, this information was kept secret because the police were concerned that Arunde might escape before they could arrest her. The agents were waiting for the right moment to act. The case attracted so much attention that hundreds of people gathered at a popular funeral home in Guamuchil to say goodbye to Annel. Annel's friends, relatives, teachers, and classmates cried and hugged each other, unable to believe that Annel had passed away like this. In the crowd, two people stood out, Arunde and her mother. Arunde entered the funeral home with her head bowed, her long black hair covering most of her face. Her outfit was unusual for the hot weather, as she wore a hooded hoodie with long sleeves, as if trying to hide something. Arunde and her mother went to pay their respects to Annel's family. They sat near Annel's coffin, where everyone present was whispering and looking at Arunde with tense expressions, noticing that she seemed very nervous. The police then approached Arunde and asked her to follow them to the police station. Arunde did not resist and went with the authorities. At the police station, the interrogation began. Initially, Arunde claimed innocence, but after a few questions, she opened up. Arunde showed scratches and bruises on her arms and torso, confessing that Annel had inflicted these injuries when she tried to defend herself in December 2013. The incident stemmed from a photo that Annel had posted online, in which they were caught hugging and partially undressed. Arunde did not like the photo because Annel had posted it without her consent. She asked Annel to delete the photo, but Annel ignored her. After a while, Annel finally agreed to delete the photo, but it was too late. Their friendship was irreparably damaged. The situation became worse when a classmate of Arunde's informed her that he had a sensitive photo of her, and she suspected that the photo was the same one that Annel had posted months ago. This made Arunde start thinking about revenge. Arunde had been expressing her anger on social media for a long time. On March 19, 2014, she wrote a cryptic statement on her personal page. Then, she went to Annel's house in the Los Fuentes neighborhood. When she arrived at Annel's house, Arunde brought 2 servings of ice cream and put on a fake smile. She said that she wanted to reconcile with Annel and be friends again. Annel happily agreed and led her into the house. She even invited Arunde upstairs to chat in her room on the 2nd floor, just like before. When Annel and Arunde entered the room, they started chatting and eating ice cream. After a short while, Arunde suggested watching a movie. She said that she was going to the bathroom and asked Annel not to stop the movie. However, instead of going to the bathroom, Arunde went downstairs to the kitchen and grabbed a sharp knife. Erunde returned to the room, hiding the knife under her clothes. She found Anil lying on the bed with her back to the door, giving her an opportunity to attack. Erunde pulled out the knife and started attacking Anil. Anil tried to defend herself but was unable to fight back. She lost too much blood and fell to the floor, becoming the victim of a brutal crime. Erunde became impatient, knowing that she had to act quickly before Anil's family returned. She tried to clean up all the traces of blood in the house. Even though she used all the rags to clean, there was still too much blood. She could only clean up part of it. She finally went to the bathroom to wash her hands and then took Anil's clothes from the closet to wear. Erunde then closed the bathroom door and left Anil's body there. She left the house, leaving the front door ajar. This story of Erunde's made Anil's relatives very angry because they knew it was a lie. According to them, Erunde's description of Anil was completely untrue. In addition, Anil's friends insisted that they had never seen the photo mentioned in the story. The proceedings moved quickly. Four police officers escorted Erunde to the juvenile court. After an hour-and-a-half-long hearing, Erunde was found guilty. Although she had carried out a deliberate plan and the murder was intentional, because she was only 16 years old, under Mexican juvenile law, Erunde was sentenced to 7 years in prison. She was transferred to a juvenile detention center. The victim's family thought justice had been served, but they were mistaken. The defense filed an appeal because the trial was held in the wrong venue. A higher court decided to reopen the trial. Despite the expedited process, the verdict was not overturned. This caused widespread public outrage. Hundreds of people shared pictures on social media with posters calling for justice for Anil. Several polls were conducted with over 5 million participants, and the majority felt that Erunde's sentence was unfair. They hoped she would receive a much longer prison sentence. However, after the trial was reconducted, the girl was still sentenced to only 7 years in prison. Hugo met with journalists and expressed his dissatisfaction. Although he was glad that the sentence was not commuted, he believed that Erunde's age should not have spared her from a longer prison term. Hugo hoped she would serve at least the full sentence. But that did not happen either. On July 6, 2016, Erunde's sentence was reduced to 5 years in prison. At the same time, the court also decided that if she behaved well, she could be released earlier. This event attracted dozens of journalists who took pictures of her, forcing state police officers to close the courthouse gates. The case became one of the most high-profile in the country. Hugo was not informed of this hearing, which made him extremely angry. The situation worsened when, on September 23, 2017, another hearing was held to evaluate Erunde's behavior in relation to reforms in the Federal Juvenile Justice Act. As a result, the girl was released after serving only 3.5 years. When Hugo left the court, he was extremely dissatisfied and felt he had witnessed a great injustice. Hugo expressed deep regret that the legislative reforms seemed to favor criminals over victims, and this seemed to be the sad end of the story. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Eurydice Dixon. Eurydice Dixon was born on November 10, 1995 in Melbourne, Australia. Her family consists of her parents and younger sister. When Eurydice was 7 years old, her mother died of substance abuse, leaving her father to care for her 2 young daughters. Eurydice's father worked hard to provide for the 2 sisters, and they lived in a small apartment. Eurydice is a quiet and polite person. Eurydice has a deep passion for the arts, especially drama. She pursued her passion at Deakin University, studying drama and actively participating in the theater troupe. Eurydice is a multi-talented person, not only a comedian, but also a writer who creates her own performances. In 2018, when Eurydice was only 22 years old, she stepped on stage at the Melbourne International Comedy Festival. Her stand-up routine, "At Home, I Feel Like a Tourist," was a huge hit, much to the delight of the audience. Eurydice was known to her friends as quiet and introverted, but also extremely intelligent for her age. Both her friends and the audience agreed that she had a natural talent for comedy. To hone her skills, Eurydice performed for free at local bars, using these opportunities to gain experience, gain fans. On Tuesday, June 12, 2018, Eurydice performed at a local bar just 3 miles from her home. That night, as usual, she humorously addressed gender equality and her concerns through her performance. After the performance, Eurydice met her boyfriend, Tony Magnuson, who was sitting in the audience. They spent time together at the bar, drank a can of soda together, and stopped at a nearby supermarket to buy groceries. At around 10:40 p.m., Tony got on the tram to go home. Eurydice walked home alone, blowing Tony a kiss and waving goodbye. Eurydice's walk home was about 3 miles long, taking her through streets, a park, and 3 soccer fields. It usually took her about an hour to get home. And Eurydice, having walked this route at night many times before, she felt safe because the streets were well lit. However, as Eurydice entered Princess Park, darkness enveloped her. To shorten the distance, she put on shoes and socks and walked barefoot on the grass. She crossed the park and the soccer field, just a short distance from her house. At 12:02 a.m., Eurydice texted her boyfriend Tony on Facebook, "I'm almost home. Where are you?" At approximately 2:50 a.m. on June 13th, a passerby found Eurydice unconscious on the soccer field at Princess Park. Although the passerby attempted CPR after calling an ambulance and the police, it was unfortunately too late. Eurydice had been strangled and had passed away. Fortunately, the area around Princess Park had several surveillance cameras that had recorded Eurydice walking alone through the park earlier. In the video, a young man can be seen about 100 feet away from her. He has blonde hair, a scraggly beard, and appears overweight, short, and stocky. To aid in the investigation, the police released the surveillance footage to local television stations and asked the public to help identify the suspect. That evening, James Todd, 19, contacted the police after his friends reported seeing his face on the news in connection with the death of Eurydice Dixon. James strongly denied any involvement in the incident and insisted that the person in the surveillance video was not him. The police asked James to come to the police station for questioning. At the police station, James denied any involvement, answered 660 questions, and insisted that he had nothing to do with the case. James also agreed to provide a DNA sample. A memorial was set up for the victim, Eurydice Dixon, where her body was found. People brought flowers to pay their respects, and a large crowd gathered to pay their respects. 5 days after her death, a vigil was held at the football stadium in memory of Eurydice. However, the night before the vigil, someone painted a giant 75-foot-long male genitalia on the lawn. Firefighters and city workers found it impossible to remove the paint and were forced to dig up and replace entire sections of the lawn, costing $20,000. The person responsible for the vandalism was identified as Andrew Null, a 29-year-old men's rights activist and Scientologist. Andrew admitted that his motive was to incite anger among feminists. During a subsequent interview, police told James that DNA evidence from the crime scene was being analyzed. James' demeanor changed. He looked down and stated that no further testing was necessary. James Todd confessed that he had been at Princess Park on the night of the tragedy, taking full responsibility for the murder and assault of Eurydice Dixon that led to her tragic death. In November 2018, James Todd gave a detailed account of his actions on June 12. He began with university classes in Broadmeadows, a suburb of Melbourne, which ended at 3 p.m. He then met 3 friends at the train station. They bought alcohol and supplies and took the train to Melbourne. The group spent time in Batman Park, sharing a bottle of alcohol until it was gone. Around 8 p.m., James purchased more cider and cannabis from people in the area. After one friend left, James and the other 2 friends returned to the train station, bought another bottle of alcohol and Coca-Cola, and took the train back to Broadmeadows. They got off at different stations, with James being the first to get off the train at Newmarket Station around 9 p.m. James Todd left Newmarket Station at 9:30 and walked down the street. At 10:43, he saw Eurydice outside a supermarket with her boyfriend Tony. After stopping at McDonald's, James returned to the same spot and saw Eurydice. She blew a kiss goodbye to her boyfriend, then started walking home. James felt attracted to Eurydice, even though he did not know her. James decided to follow her, staying about 150 feet away for an hour, walking about 3 miles across the city. Whenever Eurydice slowed down, James would stop to smoke. A surveillance camera recorded them passing the University of Melbourne. About 45 minutes after James began following her. As she neared her home, Eurydice texted her boyfriend Tony to let him know she was coming home. She was walking through Prince's Park at this time. At around midnight, Eurydice, after sending a text message to her boyfriend, was walking home across the 3rd soccer field when Eurydice was attacked from behind by James Todd. He grabbed her hair and skirt, pushed her to the ground, and then sat on her chest, grabbing her by the neck. In self-defense, Eurydice fought back by scratching James' face, neck, and shoulders. However, she was still unable to escape from James. After satisfying his desires, James strangled Eurydice until she died. According to his statement to the police, James said he thought Eurydice was drunk when he first saw her. He wanted to talk to Eurydice. However, Eurydice's autopsy showed no alcohol or illegal substances in her body. Medical examiners determined that Eurydice's cause of death was strangulation, accompanied by blunt force trauma to the head and other parts of the body. After committing the crime, James took Eurydice's phone and left the park. James found a temporary shelter and slept until 4 a.m. When he woke up, James checked the injuries on his body and face by taking a selfie with his phone. Then, James took a shower. He took off the T-shirt with the skull and special words, and left it there. Then, James returned to the area near Princess Park, where the police were investigating the case. James observed from a distance, not entering the park area. Then, James went home, buying coffee and cake on the way. At 7 a.m., James arrived home and started searching for information about Princess Park on the internet. Later, a friend of James said that James appeared on a TV show in a news report about the girl's murder. James decided to contact the police station after receiving a call from his friend. James' girlfriend, a 4-year relationship, recalls that during intimate moments, James tended to be rough with her. However, when she took a closer look at James' internet search history, she discovered that James was searching for violent and extreme content. James Todd, 19, is a working and studying student who aspires to build a career in the restaurant industry. He lives with his parents and often stays up late to watch adult videos. In particular, movies with tragic endings for female characters make him want to recreate them in real life. James grew up in very difficult living conditions. James' family consisted of 5 members, his parents and 3 sons, with James being the middle child. They lived in a chaotic and uncared for environment, with many pets and a kitchen that collapsed due to rotting floors. Food was often cooked in the bathroom on a simple stove, right next to the toilet that was often clogged. The entire house was a mess with cluttered furniture, trash and debris everywhere, with leftover food and garbage everywhere. James was rarely at home and often had to sleep on a desk in a classroom or on a park bench. His mother said that the poor condition of the house was partly due to her suffering from depression. However, James insisted that their house was always in a state of neglect, regardless of the cause. Information about the father's role in the family situation was not mentioned. Prior to the incident, James had been visiting the house less and instead spent more time at his girlfriend's house. His girlfriend noticed a change in his behavior and attributed it to the stress of college and his worries about his future. The police discovered that James had been diagnosed with mild autism spectrum disorder and attention deficit hyperactivity disorder as a child. As a teenager, James had been in and out of psychiatric care several times because his teachers were concerned about his antisocial behavior. However, it should be noted that autism or Asperger's syndrome can manifest in many different ways, but is not associated with dark or harmful sexual tendencies. In James' case, 2 psychiatrists worked with him and analyzed his situation thoroughly. The doctors concluded that James showed signs of sadistic personality disorder, a factor that may have contributed to the tragic events. Doctors believe that the combination of autism and sadistic elements in James's personality may have played a role in his tragic end. James' friends saw him as sociable, cheerful, and seemingly no different from other people. They noted that he was able to apologize, distinguish right from wrong, and behave rationally. The judge who heard the case concluded that James Todd intentionally killed Eurydice Dixon, motivated by perverse desires and the intention to act out his perverted fantasies. As a result, on September 2, 2019, James Todd was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after serving 35 years. James Todd's father, Jason Todd, took to social media to express his condolences to Eurydice Dixon's family. In it, Jason shared his pain and anxiety at not being able to see his son again after the incident. Jason also revealed that he had faced a lot of abuse and criticism on social media. However, Jason later deleted all of these posts. Meanwhile, James' legal team was trying to appeal James' life sentence. They argued that the sentence was too harsh for James, who was 19 at the time and had no previous criminal record. The lawyers also cited numerous testimonies from people around him who described James as a good and kind person. The lawyers also pointed out that James fully admitted his guilt and expressed remorse. They also pointed out that James was autistic and had lived in poor conditions before the crime. However, the appeal was ultimately rejected. Police investigating the case say James is now living in significantly better conditions than his previous home. James still feels remorse for his actions. James' time in prison was harder than other prisoners. Psychiatrists say James would pose a serious threat to women if released. Following the death of Eurydice Dixon, the bar where she last performed comedy decided to cancel its comedy nights on Tuesdays in her memory. To continue Eurydice's legacy, the Melbourne government has introduced grants to support emerging female comedians. Andrew, who desecrated the Eurydice Dixon Memorial, was convicted and sentenced to 5 months in prison. Following the tragic death of Eurydice Dixon, police have advised women to be more careful at night, avoid walking alone, and always carry their phones. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Dorothy Stratton. Dorothy Ruth Stratton was born on February 28, 1960, in a neighborhood in Vancouver. Her parents were of Dutch descent and moved to Canada a year after she was born. The Stratton family later expanded with the birth of a son named John, and 7 years later, Dorothy had a younger sister named Louise. Her family lived a simple life. Dorothy was a good student. During her childhood, she did not dream of becoming famous or aspire to have a brilliant career. She only wanted to have the basic things that her poor family could not provide. In 1977, Dorothy started working at a fast food restaurant called Dairy Queen while she was still in high school. At that time, she was 17 years old, with blonde hair, a charming face, and a tall figure that attracted a lot of attention. Not only young boys but also older, wealthy men were drawn to her beauty. One evening before the diner closed, Paul Snyder, a charming young man, walked into Dorothy's workplace. Paul was quickly attracted to the young and attractive Dorothy. After ordering and paying, Paul handed her a large bill. When Dorothy said she couldn't give him the change, Paul laughed and offered her the money on the condition that she go on a date with him immediately. Dorothy agreed. Paul Snyder, 26, was a prominent figure in Vancouver. He managed and scouted models for clubs. He had many friends and connections across Canada. When Paul saw Dorothy, 17, with her blonde hair and charming smile, he immediately recognized her great potential. Paul asked Dorothy out on a date to a fancy restaurant and gave her a red evening gown. She later wore the dress to her high school prom. Paul and Dorothy began their relationship. Although Paul was 9 years older than she was, her parents did not object to their relationship. A few months into their relationship, Paul persuaded Dorothy to participate in a daring photo shoot. She was initially uncomfortable, but Paul convinced her that she had the potential to become a successful model and earn a considerable income. Dorothy eventually agreed to Paul's proposal. Paul found a studio and hired a professional photographer to take pictures of Dorothy. After completing the photo shoot, he sent the photos to the famous Playboy magazine. Dorothy's photos made a strong impression. A Playboy editor invited her to Los Angeles. However, Paul knew that Dorothy's parents would not approve of her working for such a provocative magazine. So he forged Dorothy's mother's signature, claiming that Dorothy's mother had given her permission to sign a contract with the magazine. In the summer of 1979, Paul and Dorothy went to Hollywood. By August, Dorothy had become Playboy's Playmate of the Month and began working as a bunny at the Playboy Club. However, she felt pressured by the attention and was not used to her new role. She also found it unsettling that wealthy men were infatuated with her and spent time with her. Paul Snyder was always by Dorothy's side, always willing to help her. He was in charge of taking care of every aspect of Dorothy's life, from organizing her schedule to signing contracts. However, she also felt completely controlled by Paul. To strengthen their relationship, Paul proposed marriage, and Dorothy finally agreed after some consideration. The reason she accepted the proposal was that she felt she owed him after all that Paul had done for her. In Dorothy's eyes, if it weren't for Paul, she might still be a waitress living off tips. She always felt that if she had never met him, her life would have been boring, working at the diner. However, Dorothy's family had doubts about this decision as they thought that Paul was using Dorothy for profit. Therefore, they warned her against marrying him. In 1979, the same year that Paul proposed, they held a minimalist wedding in Las Vegas. After the simple wedding in 1979, Paul and Dorothy continued to pursue their careers diligently. Dorothy also started filming, where she received recognition from directors not only for her beauty and charm but also for her real acting ability. As Dorothy's fame and fortune grew, she used her earnings to buy a spacious home in Los Angeles, where she lived with her husband. Paul Snyder was pleased with his wife's accomplishments, boasting to friends that Dorothy's growing fame was a shared success. As Dorothy's manager, Paul was always present at her photo shoots and events, overseeing their finances and assets. He also closely monitored her diet, clothing choices, and alcohol consumption at social gatherings, occasionally giving her guidance on which influential people to associate with to advance her career. There was much speculation that Dorothy had an affair with Hugh Hefner, the editor-in-chief of Playboy magazine. However, Hugh denied these claims, insisting that Dorothy was not a woman of loose morals. Over time, Dorothy began to realize that her husband Paul was controlling her life too much. Dorothy appointed a new professional manager and began to exclude her husband from photo shoots. inventing various excuses. The distance between the couple grew, and sensing this, Paul's mental state deteriorated. He became jealously protective of his wife, even hiring a private investigator to monitor her actions. However, no evidence of guilt was ever produced. Paul began to impose restrictions on his wife's clothing, not allowing her to wear provocative clothes and preventing men who did not benefit the family financially from admiring her. He incited conflicts and, in moments of anger, even resorted to physical violence. Dorothy found herself unable to tolerate her husband's aggressive outbursts and increasingly sought to distance herself from him. Friends and colleagues observed growing troubles in Paul and Dorothy's marriage. Playboy staff frequently advised her to end her relationship with her husband. While Dorothy was busy with photo shoots, Paul lived in their home, using his wife's earnings and indulging in idleness. One day, he discovered that Dorothy had set up a company in her name and was actively investing in it. The move, advised by her manager, was strategically arranged so that, in the event of a divorce, Paul Snyder would have no claim to the money. Paul's behavior escalated into more scandal as he sought his influence over his wife diminish. As Dorothy rarely returned home, Paul began to realize that his control over what he considered his golden ticket was slipping away from him. In the spring of 1980, at a gathering at the Playboy Mansion, 20-year-old Dorothy met 40-year-old film director Peter Bogdanovich, a close associate of Hugh Hefner. Peter was charmed by Dorothy and invited her to star in his upcoming comedy. Everyone laughed, and Dorothy accepted the offer to play a mistress. On March 22, Dorothy set off alone to New York to shoot the comedy. She lied to Paul, telling him that the director had forbidden anyone other than the cast and crew from being on the set. In fact, she feared that Paul might cause a disturbance during filming. Furthermore, Dorothy asked her manager to filter calls from her domineering husband while she was on set. In New York, Dorothy found herself infatuated with Peter, and a passionate affair blossomed between the actress and the director. Dorothy exuded joy at being with the new person in her life, not wanting to miss out on the opportunity with a sophisticated, wealthy, and influential director. Her attitude towards her husband became distant and cold. Dorothy spent 2 months in New York, and during this time, Paul was left alone in their large home in Los Angeles. Sometimes Paul brought other women home, who were shocked to discover that Paul was being unfaithful to such a gorgeous wife who was also a Playboy model. In April 1980, Dorothy returned to California to attend the Playboy Awards. She won the prestigious title of Model of the Year and appeared on the cover of the magazine, winning a new award. As part of the recognition, she received a lavish gift from Playboy, a Jaguar sports car, and a cash prize of $200,000. She developed a close friendship with Hugh Hefner, the editor-in-chief, who had high hopes for her. After the ceremony, Dorothy embarked on a 2-week promotional tour across Canada. During the weekend, Dorothy attended a party with director Peter. Meanwhile, she was planning to spend the final part of the tour with her family in Vancouver. However, Paul found out about these plans and immediately traveled to Vancouver, where he had experienced managing clubs and numerous connections. During Dorothy's brief break, Paul coerced her into working in clubs and kept all the profits. This period led to a significant conflict between the couple. Dorothy was in tears, contemplating giving up her career to salvage the marriage. She expressed a desire to return to her parents' house with Paul and start a new life. Paul dismissed this idea. After the tour in Canada, Dorothy returned to New York to continue filming, while avoiding her husband. At one point, she phoned Paul and requested some space in their relationship. Paul became depressed and angry with Dorothy. At the time, he was having an affair with a girl under the age of 18. The girl looked like a model, and Paul wanted to transform her into the next Playboy bunny. However, he soon realized that his young lover could never surpass his wife. In June 1980, On their first wedding anniversary, Paul received a heart-wrenching letter from Dorothy, in which she expressed her desire for a divorce and her intention to stop supporting him financially. This convinced Paul that his fears of Dorothy's infidelity were justified, especially as he suspected she was involved with director Peter Bogdanovich. To gather evidence of his wife's infidelity, Paul hired a private investigator. On one occasion, he called Dorothy's manager and threatened to cause trouble or even do something more serious. The manager advised Dorothy to hire bodyguards and be cautious around Paul. However, Dorothy ignored this advice. Without a green card and lacking permanent residence in the United States, Paul struggled with employment and finances. Facing the risk of running out of money, he withdrew all the funds from his and Dorothy's joint bank account. Consequently, he also sold Dorothy's valuable assets, including collectibles, jewelry, and the Jaguar sports car that Playboy had given her, all at low prices and only for cash. Furthermore, he began renting out rooms in their large house to friends, partly due to depression and loneliness. Gradually, Paul began contemplating a return to his native Canada. In mid-July, filming for the movie in which Dorothy was starring was completed. After that, Dorothy and director Peter Bogdanovich went on a 10-day vacation to England. Upon returning to Los Angeles on July 30th, Dorothy decided to move into the director's mansion in the affluent neighborhood of Bel Air. Meanwhile, Dorothy's ex-husband Paul was plotting his revenge. On the afternoon of July 31st, he borrowed a gun and went to Peter Bogdanovich's house at night. He hid near the gates of the mansion, determined to shoot anyone who came near. After hours of fruitless waiting, Paul became desperate and drove to a mountain area overlooking Los Angeles. During his time alone there, he was plagued by painful thoughts of suicide. When he returned home late at night, Paul still harbored hopes of reconciling with Dorothy. A week later, on August 8th, he convinced Dorothy to meet him at his house. However, Dorothy had changed significantly since their separation. She had become a confident woman with a newfound charm and was no longer affected by Paul's words. Dorothy told Paul that she was in love with another man and wanted a divorce. Paul remained calm and asked her to come back in a week to discuss the breakup amicably. However, the next day, Paul attempted to purchase a gun. He visited several stores but was unable to buy one because he was a Canadian citizen. Paul asks his private investigator to purchase a rifle for self-defense and home security reasons, but the private investigator advises against it and refuses to assist. On August 11th, Paul finds an ad in the newspaper for an old 12-gauge shotgun for sale. He decides to go to the San Fernando Valley to check it out and possibly purchase the shotgun. However, he gets lost and cannot find the address, so he returns without the shotgun. 2 days later, on August 13th, Paul returns to the same location and finds the seller. He purchases the old shotgun and tells the seller that he will use it for hunting. On August 14th, Paul asks his roommate to leave the house so he can talk to his wife, Dorothy, in private without interruption. Dorothy's managers and assistants advised her to accompany them to the meeting or to resolve the issues over the phone. However, Dorothy decided to go alone. She brought a large sum of money to express her gratitude to Paul for his past help. She hoped that the meeting would be peaceful and that she could maintain a friendly relationship with Paul. Dorothy planned to have a short meeting with Paul, so she scheduled a photo shoot for that evening. At noon on August 14th, Dorothy went to meet Paul at his home. Upon arrival, Dorothy received a safety check call from her manager. They had previously set up a specific code for her to use if she encountered any problems. After assuring the manager that everything was fine, the call ended. However, the conversation between Dorothy and Paul gradually became tense and escalated into a dispute. In a sudden fit of rage, Paul pulled out a gun and shot Dorothy in the face. After causing Dorothy's death, Paul seemed to lose control of himself and behaved strangely. he eventually took his own life. At 8 p.m., Dorothy's roommates returned home and found her car parked in front of the house. When they entered the house, they saw Dorothy's handbag in the living room and thought that Paul and Dorothy had made up. They assumed the couple was in the bedroom, so they decided to retreat to their own room and keep quiet. Dorothy's managers became increasingly worried when they could not reach her by phone. They finally managed to contact Paul and Dorothy's roommate at 11 p.m. After a brief conversation, the roommates decided to check out the situation in the master bedroom. When they entered, they witnessed a horrifying sight. Both Dorothy and Paul had died. According to the autopsy, Dorothy Stratton, 20, died about an hour after she arrived home. Dorothy's husband, Paul, died about an hour after his wife's death. Hugh Hefner was one of the first people to be informed of the tragic event. He called his friend Peter Bogdanovich and broke the news of Dorothy's death. When Peter heard that Dorothy had died, he was so shocked that he fainted. He then spent a long time on sedatives to overcome his pain and grief. As a result, Playboy magazine was sent out for publication before the editors knew about it, so the August cover was not changed. Consequently, the magazine was published with a picture of Dorothy Stratton, who had tragically passed away. However, for the annual Playboy issue, her image was replaced with that of another model. Peter Bogdanovich was responsible for organizing and financing Dorothy Stratton's funeral. The loss of his lover had a profound impact on him. He decided to cremate her remains, which were then buried in a Los Angeles cemetery. After the tragic death of the model, the film studio decided not to release They All Laughed, the comedy in which Dorothy had starred. Determined to promote the work, Peter bought the film rights with his own money. The comedy, They All Laughed, was finally released in 1981. Despite his efforts, the film did not receive significant praise and failed to attract much audience attention. This commercial failure cost Peter millions of dollars and eventually led to his bankruptcy. Several years after Dorothy Stratton's death, rumors surfaced that director Peter Bogdanovich had secretly met with Dorothy's younger sister, Louise Stratton, who was then 13 years old. The Stratton family strongly denied these claims and took legal action against the spread of these rumors. However, in 1988, 8 years later, Peter, then 49, actually married Louise Stratton, who was then 20. Louise later stated in interviews that their romance began when she was 18. Peter Bogdanovich and Louise Stratton were married for 13 years, ending in divorce in 2001. Peter never remarried, devoting his life to filmmaking. He died in 2022 at the age of 82. Louise Stratton, who now resides in her hometown of Vancouver, pursued a career as an actress and film director.